Our story begins in the unexplored northern region of South Korea. A young man glanced around nervously when an elderly man approached him, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. The old man asked if this was the young man's first expedition. Accepting the coffee, the young man admitted that while he had ventured into gates and dungeons before, this was his first time in an uncharted area, which made him uneasy. The old man chuckled and advised him to brace himself mentally. Such places, untouched for centuries, were likely teeming with monsters, perhaps even ancient ones. Curious, the young man inquired if their expedition leader was truly from the renowned Lee clan, rumored to be the patriarch's brother, and thus exceptionally powerful. The old man glanced to the side and revealed that their leader was, in fact, an illegitimate son of the clan, a man so weak he had been exiled. He was speaking of Lee Chiol, the 9th illegitimate child of the esteemed Marshal Lee clan. Chiol overheard the old man's words, telling the newcomer that he lacked both talent and tenacity, being only a 7th rank martial artist at his age. The old man questioned how they could rely on someone like Chiol, causing him to grip his sword tightly in shame. Just then, someone approached Chiol and brusquely ordered him to prepare to move. Chiol glared at the man briefly before lowering his gaze and complying. He was aware that the men around him belonged to the Shadow Sword Squad, a direct unit under the Lee clan patriarch, tasked with his protection. Yet, something felt off. Chiol couldn't shake the uneasy feeling about this mission. There was a time when Chiol had dreams and aspirations. When he first understood the weight of being part of the esteemed Lee clan, he had been filled with hope. During the steel selection ritual, he had been chosen by the highest ranked weapon, a moment he believed would mark the beginning of his rise. He thought that with hard work and recognition, he might one day earn the respect of his peers. But that hope faded. One day, a healer revealed Chiol's X-ray results, showing mana paths entirely unsuited for magic or martial arts. The priest declared that reaching the 9th rank would be nothing short of a miracle. When word spread, Chiol's achievements at the ritual were dismissed as a fluke. Despite this, Chiol persevered, defying expectations by reaching the 7th rank by age 25. For a brief moment, he felt genuine pride, even if his siblings had achieved the same rank much earlier. But his joy was short-lived. By 30, he was cast out of the clan. If not for his eldest brother's intervention, Chiol might have left the household in a coffin. For 10 years, he had been on the run, living in obscurity. During this time, chaos spread across the land. Unexplored regions expanded and monster invasions grew more frequent. One day, a newspaper landed on his face. As he picked it up, he was stunned to read that his father, the pinnacle of martial arts and patriarch of the Lee clan, had passed away. Soon after, members of the Shadow Sword Squad found him. When he asked how they had tracked him down, they ignored his question and handed him a decree. Chiol sighed, wondering if his cursed bloodline would ever release its grip on him. The decree ordered him to investigate the B1 zone of the unexplored regions and join an expedition team by 1830 that day. It was signed by Patriarch Lee Gun-seong, his 3rd brother. Chiol couldn't help but wonder what had become of his eldest brother. The Shadow Squad members turned to leave, informing Chiol they would see him at the designated location. He stopped them and asked what had happened to the eldest member of the family. The Shadow members remained silent, refusing to answer. Realizing they wouldn't respond, Chiol questioned the purpose of ordering him to investigate the unexplored region when he hadn't wielded a sword in 10 years and was only a 7th rank martial artist. One of the men coldly asked if he intended to refuse the orders. Knowing that refusal without justification meant certain death, Chiol reluctantly agreed to comply. Upon hearing his answer, the Shadow Squad vanished in an instant, leaving him cursing in anger, fully aware he had no choice. Back in the present, the expedition team ventured deeper into the unexplored region. The young man was startled to see an abandoned building ahead and wondered why it stood there of all places. As they approached, they noticed the structure was remarkably well preserved. The Shadow Squad ordered everyone to enter, and the group cautiously stepped inside, swords drawn. A collective gasp escaped them as they discovered a massive monster's bones and a pile of human remains. The team speculated whether they had stumbled upon the corpse of an ancient monster. Suddenly, the Shadow Squad captain declared they had found what they were looking for and ordered his men to begin. Without warning, the Shadow members lunged forward, slashing the young man's head first. Chiol and the old man stood frozen in shock. The old man shouted, demanding to know what they were doing. One of the Shadow members coldly replied that they had all been doomed from the start. He then charged at the terrified old man, yelling that they should consider it an honor to serve the clan's greater good. Just as the man was about to strike, Chiol intervened, stabbing him from behind and demanding to know who was behind this betrayal. The Shadow member, unfazed, revealed that the orders had come from the Liege himself. He gripped the sword piercing his body and explained that their mission was to bring everyone here and eliminate them as cleanly as possible. With a single hand, he shattered the sword, his wounds healing almost instantly. The old man swung his sword at the man in desperation, but the Shadow member effortlessly countered, slashing him with a single strike. He sneered at Chiol, calling him pathetic, before rushing at him and delivering a brutal kick to his chest. Blood spurted from Chiol's mouth as the man shouted that he had expected more from someone with the blood of the esteemed Lee clan. Chiol was thrown back with tremendous force, slamming into a wall and coughing up more blood. Gritting his teeth, he refused to accept death like this. Scanning his surroundings, he spotted a sword embedded in the monster's bone. He knew it had to be a powerful weapon, one capable of slaying a great beast. Even if it had been there for years, it might still be usable. Summoning his strength, he grabbed the sword and pulled it free. But to his shock, the blade began to dissolve into the air. Before he could process what was happening, the Shadow member appeared behind him, mocking that he had never imagined someone from the Lee clan could be so utterly pathetic. With a brutal slash, the man cut Chiol deeply from behind, shouting that he would send him off like a Lee, at the very least. Chiol collapsed to the ground, blood pouring from his back. As his vision blurred, he thought bitterly about the cruelty of the heavens. He had spent his entire life struggling, running, and failing, only to meet such an ignoble end. Unbeknownst to him, the dissolving sword released a dark energy that began to wrap around him. In his final moments, he wished for another chance at life, vowing to change everything if given the opportunity. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. His father's. Lee Tactician, the patriarch of the esteemed Lee clan, was asking if this child was Yoojung's and what had happened to her. Chiol slowly opened his eyes to see the butler, Choi, replying that Yoojung had already passed when they found her. Chiol's gaze shifted to his father, who looked remarkably young, as did the butler. He tried to call out to them, but no sound came. Then, he noticed a baby's hands in front of him. When he moved his own hand, the baby's hands mirrored the motion. It dawned on him. He was in the body of a baby. This was no mere dream. He had been given a second chance. Chiol waved his hands in shock, trying to make sense of what had happened. He knew he should be dead, but now he found himself in what seemed like the past. Was this the afterlife, a flashback, or something else entirely? Tactician, his father, instructed Choi to assign Chiol a handmaid and a few Shadow Sword Squad members as guards, just like the other children. Tactician also ordered Choi to have Chiol participate in the upcoming steel selection ritual alongside the 8 other children. Choi hesitated, reminding Tactician that Chiol was still very young and not yet ready, and that the youngest of the 8 children was still a few months older. Tactician dismissed the concern, stating that age shouldn't matter, which surprised Choi. After giving his orders, Tactician left the room, leaving Choi to sigh in relief. Chiol, still processing everything, felt the overwhelming pressure his father exuded, just as he remembered. He looked down at his tiny hands, realizing this was too vivid to be a mere flashback. He recalled Tactician and Choi's conversation, confirming that this had indeed happened before. Yet he struggled to accept the possibility that he had truly regressed to the past. A few months after Chiol's return to the past, the esteemed Lee clan's special day arrived. The steel selection ritual. This event was a significant tradition where the clan's children displayed their talents by being chosen by weapons. Tactician, who had been selected by dozens of blades in his youth, had become the greatest swordsman of his generation. Chiol's eldest brother, chosen by swords, tomes, and staff, was renowned for his mastery of both magic and swordsmanship. Chiol knew that this time, he would be the one participating. His handmaid, Moon Gawa, praised him for dressing so well, and remarked how well he was adapting to his new environment without crying. She carried him in her arms, assuring him that he would achieve a good result, and that she believed in his bright future. Her words brought a smile to his face as he remembered how Gawa had been like a mother to him in his past life. Sadly, she had been expelled due to the hatred of his other brothers. Gawa had been the one person who cried over his loneliness and stayed by his side. Touching her face gently, Chiol swore to himself that he would not let her be cast out again and would protect her at all costs. He hugged her softly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. A servant entered the room to report that the preparations were complete. Gawa asked if they should depart, and Chiol nodded with a smile. Meanwhile, in the Patriarch's office, Choi reported to Tactician that the ritual preparations were finished. Tactician acknowledged the report and instructed Choi to accompany him to the event. Tactician then made his way to the stage, accompanied by his 2 children and servants. As they entered, the crowd erupted in cheers. The audience's attention was particularly drawn to the illegitimate son who had been brought in from outside. In the audience sat the esteemed Lee clan matriarch, Baek Hwayeon, along with Minister Lee Tae-hong, the first child of the Lee clan, Lee Myung-jung, and the third child, Lee Gun-seong. Tae-hong commented on Chiol's young age, and Myung-jung noted that none of them had participated in the ritual at such an early age. Myung-jung asked Gun-seong if he remembered correctly, to which Gun-seong simply replied yes, adding that he had no idea where Chiol had come from. The exchange left Gun-seong intrigued. Tactician announced the beginning of the steel selection ritual. He ordered a maid to bring his 8th child, Lee Hwa, onto the stage. The maid complied, and Tactician placed Hwa on the ritual stone. He then took out a knife, gently slashed one of Hwa's fingers, and let her blood drip onto the stone. Hwa cried out in pain as the stone emitted a bright light. The light floated toward the stage where the weapons were displayed and wrapped around the ivory sword, a relic rank weapon of utmost prestige that had not responded to anyone for generations. Tactician used his power to lift the sword and bring it closer, where it landed perfectly in his hand. He declared that from that day forward, the ivory sword belonged to Hwa. The elders congratulated little Hwa, expressing their joy at the birth of another talented child in the family. Hwayeon thanked them, though her happy expression faltered as the ceremony continued, knowing that Chiol's turn was next. Tactician announced that it was Chiol's turn, prompting whispers among the crowd. Many questioned how an illegitimate child from outside the clan could be allowed to participate in such a sacred ritual. Gawa handed Chiol to Tactician, who placed him on the ritual stone. Tactician sliced Chiol's finger, but unlike Hwa, Chiol endured the pain without crying. Tactician patted his head, expressing pride in his resilience. Chiol realized the moment had come. He remembered that in his past life he had been chosen by the Clear Echo, a heaven-ranked sword. As his blood dripped onto the stone, a bright light emerged. Chiol stared at it, wondering if, in this life, he would once again be chosen by a heaven-ranked sword. A few minutes earlier, Tae-hong had noticed Hwayeon's reaction and deduced from her expression that she was in a rather foul mood. He guessed it was only natural, given the sudden appearance of Tactician's hidden son, Chiol. Tae-hong knew that a pitiful fate likely awaited Chiol, as surviving as an illegitimate son in the Lee clan would be no easy feat. As Tae-hong pondered this, he noticed someone approaching. It was the head elder of the Lee clan, Lee Chiol, a purist and close-minded old man. Tae-hong expected a sarcastic remark from him. Chiol commented that Tae-hong seemed unusually interested in the illegitimate child, prompting Tae-hong to greet him cautiously, aware that he needed to stay alert around the unpredictable elder. Chiol asked if Chiol was the child the patriarch had brought in, to which Tae-hong confirmed, explaining that the Shadow Sword Squad had discovered and brought him in. Cheol expressed his confusion over the patriarch's decision, questioning why a bastard child of unknown origin was allowed to participate in the steel selection ritual. He pointedly reminded Taehong that the ritual had proven useless for illegitimate children in the past, even referencing Taehong's own failure to be chosen by any weapon. Taehong, angered by the comment, demanded to know what Cheol meant. Cheol quickly apologized but added that Taehong's story as an illegitimate child who failed the ritual was well known. Taehong, though furious, forced himself to remain composed. Cheol, however, couldn't resist whispering that, in the end, a bastard child would always be a bastard child. He stabbed his wand into the ground and coldly stated that everyone must know their place. Taehong, unable to hold back his anger, warned Cheol to restrain himself as he would not tolerate further insults. But as he spoke, he noticed Cheol expression shift. The elder tightly clenched the railing, stuttering in disbelief. Taehong too turned his attention forward and was shocked by what he saw. Cheol muttered in disbelief, asking how such a thing could be possible, while Taehong felt a surge of excitement, though he was equally bewildered. They watched as the bright light from the stone Cheol sat on floated toward the center of the stage, slamming into the array of weapons. Masterworks like the sanguine spear, the iron-welded blade, the divine sword Mahu, the responsive dragon crossbow, and many others began responding to Cheol. The crowd was in an uproar, unable to believe their eyes. Even weapons that already had owners were reacting to Cheol. The light wrapped around the sword Myeongjong was holding, leaving him stunned. Myeongjong excitedly turned to Gunseong, asking if he could believe what was happening and remarking that their youngest brother must possess extraordinary talent. Gunseong simply nodded in agreement. Chaos erupted as the audience struggled to comprehend the situation. Many whispered that an illegitimate child shouldn't be capable of such a feat, yet they all knew the steel selection ritual was infallible. Taishin calmly ordered silence, and the crowd immediately fell quiet. He reminded everyone that, according to clan law, all weapons that chose Cheol rightfully belonged to him. However, given the unprecedented nature of the situation, he invited suggestions on how to proceed. Taehong raised his hand and proposed that, while the clan's laws were clear, granting Cheol all the responding weapons would undermine the ritual's purpose. He suggested allowing Cheol to choose a single weapon instead, ensuring the ritual's integrity for future generations. Taishin considered the suggestion and snapped his fingers, causing the weapons to float in the air. He agreed to Taehong's proposal and lifted Cheol using his power, gently placing him on the floor. Taishin then instructed Cheol to choose the weapon he desired. Cheol, though unsure why this outcome differed from his past life, decided to make the most of the opportunity. He crawled forward, passing by legendary weapons like Franch, the dragon-slaying sword, the holy spear, forged from the body of a saint, White Whale, Valheim, the staff crafted from the world tree where Fae rested, the celestial sword, said to have been forged when the sun, moon, and stars aligned, and many others. Yet, he continued crawling until he reached his destination, confident in his choice. Taishin was stunned when he realized Cheol was reaching for the Black Twilight, a sword discovered by the clan's founder in unexplored lands. Covered in dust and shrouded in mystery, the sword's true power had never been unlocked, and no ancestor had ever been chosen by it. Though classified as a heaven-level weapon, its known abilities did not justify the ranking, and it was stored alongside other heaven-level weapons, more as a symbol of its connection to the founder than its utility. Taishin wondered if Cheol's choice was merely the whim of a child or something more significant. Taishin lifted both Cheol and the Black Twilight, holding the child in one hand and the sword in the other. He smiled, musing whether this could be another will of the skies. With pride, he raised the sword and announced that Cheol had chosen the Black Twilight, marking the end of the ritual. Hwayeon, however, was furious. She saw Cheol as nothing more than a nuisance, and resolved that if he ever became an obstacle, she would have no choice but to eliminate him. 9 years later, 9-year-old Cheol informed his maid Gawa that he was heading to his afternoon training. She was surprised and insisted on escorting him, following closely behind. Cheol told her he could go alone, but she disagreed, questioning why he was heading to Zone 1 when the other training areas were empty, and Zone 1 wasn't particularly spacious. He explained that someone was waiting for him there. Suddenly, they heard a scream nearby. Gawa noted that it seemed someone was in Zone 7. They soon saw a young girl panting heavily while being lectured by an instructor. The instructor shouted at her to perform another vertical slice, and she confidently agreed. Cheol recognized the girl as the 8th child, Hwa. Gawa, worried, reminded him to address her as his older sister, as he could get into trouble if someone overheard him calling her otherwise. However, Cheol didn't want to call her sister, as they were only 5 months apart. Hwa paused to catch her breath, but the instructor barked at her to wield the sword as if it were an extension of her body, emphasizing that she must handle it carefully to avoid injury. Frustrated, Hwa threw the sword to the ground in exhaustion and shouted back, demanding to know why the instructor was nagging her so much. She angrily declared that it didn't matter how she held the sword, causing the instructor to panic. He pleaded with her to calm down, explaining that his instructions were for her benefit, and begged her to try again, assuring her she would do better this time. Cheol asked Gawa who the man was, noting that he seemed to have his work cut out for him. Gawa explained that he was Commander Baek Lee-hyun of the Ebony Squad. Cheol was surprised that a commander of such skill was teaching a 9-year-old. Gawa, sensing his reaction, reassured him that a teacher who could truly recognize his talent would appear soon. Cheol, though confused, simply nodded. Gawa then apologized for not being able to look after him as well as she would have liked, blaming her own incompetence. She mentioned how Hwa had grown up eating nutrient-rich baby food, implying that Cheol had not been given the same advantages. Cheol, frustrated, asked why she kept bringing this up and reminded her that he was always grateful for everything she had done for him. Her eyes softened at his words. He then told her he didn't want instructors like Lee-hyun, as they were only there because of the Lee clan's influence. He added that he already had some good teachers. A short while later, Cheol arrived at Zone 1, the esteemed Martial Hall, an exclusive training area reserved for the direct line of the Lee clan. He knew Zone 1 was more of a symbolic space, representing the clan's distinguished history rather than a practical training area. However, he had a reason for being there. He stopped in front of a closed storage room and pushed the door open, revealing a collection of older weapons stored inside. Among them, he found a cracked sword leaning against the wall. He picked it up, wondering if he should use it today. After regressing 9 years ago, Chiol experienced several surprising changes. One of the most significant was his newfound ability to read the memories embedded in weapons. Standing in the training hall, he spread his feet, exhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and gathered his inner energy in his chest. When he opened his eyes, he focused on the cracked sword in his hand. Through it, he saw a memory of a man explaining to a group of students that the basics of sword techniques were the same for both advanced and beginner levels. Chiol watched as they demonstrated the correct posture and followed their movements. He had learned that the older and more remarkable the weapon, or the stronger the wielder's attachment to it, the clearer the memories he could see. Thanks to the sword's memories, he successfully executed the first form of the 7-star sword technique, Crimson Wind. He felt a sense of accomplishment, having finally mastered the 7-star sword. Over the past 2 years, he had absorbed the memories of most of the weapons stored in the esteemed martial hall. Startled by the sound of clapping behind him, Chiol turned to see Taehong approaching with a wide smile. Taehong, a 4th-rank martial artist and the minister of the Lee clan, was one of the few family members who had genuinely cared for Chiol in both his past life and the present. Though not from the direct line, Taehong's skills were widely respected. Chiol greeted his uncle respectfully, and Taehong patted his head, telling him there was no need to be so formal. Taehong expressed pride in Chiol's dedication to training, noting that he saw him at the training hall every day on his way to and from work. He acknowledged how difficult it must be for Chiol to face discrimination from his siblings, but encouraged him to overcome it. Chiol assured him he was fine, emphasizing that he was still part of the esteemed Lee clan's bloodline. He explained that he had learned the clan's name carried the meaning of prove yourself with the sword, and he had sworn to do just that with his own strength. Taehong was surprised by his maturity and couldn't help but wonder why someone like Chiol had to be born illegitimate. Taehong reminded Chiol that he was nearing the age for the naming ceremony and offered to be his teacher for the event, even though it was a bit late. He asked Chiol what he thought of the idea and if he was pleased with the offer. Chiol thanked him, but declined, explaining that there was a rule forbidding him from having a teacher before the naming ceremony. He added that he didn't want to put Taehong in a difficult position. Taehong pointed out that Chiol's siblings were blatantly breaking the rules, receiving training from great teachers and consuming nutritious food. Chiol responded that he believed rules shouldn't be broken, even if everyone else was doing so. He reiterated his desire to prove himself with his own strength. Taehong, struck by his resolve, marveled at how mature Chiol seemed for a 9-year-old, and noticed that his eyes resembled Taishin's. He admitted that he couldn't change Chiol's mind and patted his head firmly, remarking that he was as stubborn as his father. Taehong expressed concern, saying he couldn't do much if Chiol was set on his decision, but it still bothered him. He then asked if there was anything else Chiol needed. Chiol's face lit up, as he had been waiting for this moment. He told Taehong he had a favor to ask, which excited his uncle. When Taehong asked what it was, Chiol smirked and replied that he wanted to see what was hidden beneath the secret warehouse. The request left Taehong startled. Later, a car arrived in front of a massive gate. A guard signaled for the vehicle to stop and asked the driver, Taehong, to identify himself and state the purpose of his visit. Taehong explained that he was the minister of the Lee clan and was there for a routine inventory check. He introduced Chiol as the youngest member of the Lee clan, adding that he was on a field trip. The guard verified their identities and allowed them to enter. As the gates opened, they drove inside. Chiol knew he needed to act fascinated, so he gazed out the window with an expression of awe. Taehong asked if he was really that excited, to which Chiol replied yes, explaining that he had heard the secret warehouse housed the family's greatest treasures. He smiled to himself, knowing the item he sought was also stored there. The secret warehouse was legendary. It was said to contain weapons of myth, ancient relics whose existence was uncertain, and countless other rare items. People claimed that if something extraordinary existed, it could be found within the Lee clan's secret warehouse. As they entered, Chiol continued to act amazed, looking around with wide eyes. Taehong pressed the elevator button and explained that the basement of the warehouse contained weapons sealed away for various reasons. Chiol excitedly mentioned that he had heard about monster-level weapons that consumed their owners. Taehong agreed, teasing that if Chiol held such a weapon, it might devour both his body and soul. Chiol pretended to be scared. Taehong laughed at his reaction and reassured him that they wouldn't be entering such dangerous areas. He told Chiol to take his time exploring while he handled his business upstairs. Chiol nodded, stepped into the elevator, and waved goodbye to Taehong. When the doors closed, he sighed in relief, realizing how exhausting it was to act like an innocent child. Chiol knew the basement of the secret warehouse, often called the graveyard of weapons, was where countless dangerous and sealed relics were stored. His reason for coming here was to find a specific weapon, Boundless. He recalled that in its normal state, Boundless appeared as a dagger, but when infused with mana, it could change its length, shape, weight, and other properties at will. In his past life, Gunseong, the 3rd child of the Lee clan, had discovered Boundless in this very warehouse. The weapon's overwhelming versatility earned Gunseong the title Ever-Changing, which ultimately led to him becoming the patriarch instead of the eldest sibling, who had been the likeliest candidate. After ascending to power, Gunseong had hunted down Chiol, who was in hiding, and purged him. To prevent history from repeating itself, Chiol knew he had to secure Boundless before Gunseong could find it. Chiol gathered his mana in his palm, preparing to search for the weapon. He knew it would take time, but he was determined to check each relic one by one. As he released his mana, he swore to himself that this time, he would obtain Boundless before Gunseong. An hour later, Chiol examined another dagger, only to find it wasn't Boundless. Frustrated, he sighed. He had spent the last hour checking every dagger-like weapon in the warehouse, but still hadn't found what he was looking for. Refusing to give up, he decided to search again, convinced that Boundless was somewhere in the basement. he guessed he must have missed it during his initial search. As he moved toward a display stand, a rusty dagger suddenly fell off the table and clattered to the floor in front of him. Chiol bent down to pick it up, noting how heavily corroded it was. He wondered how a weapon could deteriorate to such a state. Before he could touch it, his mana surged on its own, lifting the dagger toward him. Shocked, he panicked, stammering as he tried to understand why his mana was acting independently. Before he could react, his mana wrapped around him, pulling him into another realm. Chiol found himself surrounded by piles of bones and scattered weapons. He shouted, demanding to know where he was. He quickly realized this wasn't like the memories he had experienced before. This felt far more vivid, as if he were physically present in this place. Suddenly, a deafening growl echoed behind him. He turned and froze at the sight of an overwhelming presence, a primal monster that seemed to strike fear into nature itself. It was an apocalypse-rank monster, the kind that had once devoured entire civilizations. Trembling in terror, Chiol knew he stood no chance against such a creature. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. As the monster drew closer, his legs gave out, and he collapsed. Just then, he heard footsteps approaching from behind. Turning his head, he saw a man holding a bloodied sword. The man dashed forward with incredible speed. He leaped into the air and launched his sword at the apocalypse-rank monster. With a single devastating strike, a technique Chiol recognized as split demon, the man cleaved the monster in half, killing it instantly. The monster's body exploded, raining chunks of flesh from the sky. Chiol couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The man had defeated an apocalypse-rank monster with a single strike. As he looked up, he saw the man standing calmly in front of him. The man turned and asked who Chiol was. Stunned that the man could see him, Chiol hesitated to respond. The man stepped closer, demanding to know why Chiol was there. Without warning, the man raised his sword and swung it down, declaring that this was an act of mercy, and that he would send Chiol away painlessly. Chiol braced himself, but before the blade could strike, he woke up. Gasping for breath, Chiol released the rusty dagger he had been clutching. He stared at it, trying to make sense of the vivid scene he had just experienced. The pressure he had felt in that vision still lingered, as if it had been real. Before he could process it further, the rust on the dagger began to melt away. Once the corrosion had completely disappeared, Chiol picked up the now pristine dagger. He slashed his finger with it, letting his blood drip onto the blade. He declared that he would become the master of 10,000 soldiers. The dagger emitted a bright light, signaling its activation. Chiol swung it to the side, and to his amazement, the blade expanded in size. He spun around, testing its movements with a few more slashes. Confident now, he realized he had finally found Boundless. Days later, Chiol was in Zone 1's training hall, attempting to replicate a technique, but it ended in yet another failure. It had been a week since he obtained Boundless, the weapon he had discovered in the underground secret warehouse. To keep it hidden, he had transformed Boundless into a ring. As he practiced, he recalled the technique he had witnessed in the vision. The split demon. The man who had demonstrated it had only shown him the technique and mentioned its name, likely because he believed Chiol wasn't ready to learn it yet. Chiol knew that, beyond the sheer power of the technique, the man's movements had been incredibly graceful, something he couldn't replicate no matter how hard he tried. Smiling, he raised his sword and swung it backward, reminding himself that he wasn't in a rush. He spread his legs, recalling how, before his regression, he had been an outcast who couldn't even inherit the family's basic techniques. This was his first time experiencing such advanced martial arts, and he felt determined to master it. He assured himself that he could do it, as he remembered the man's movements clearly. However, he suddenly stopped, realizing a critical flaw. He was a 9-year-old child, not an adult. Trying to mimic an adult's movements would never be efficient. He realized he needed to adapt the technique to suit his own body, slowly and naturally. Relaxing, Chiol closed his eyes and adjusted his stance. He wielded the sword in a way that felt natural for his smaller frame, and swung it down with force, causing the floor to crack. Pulling the sword out of the ground, he felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing he was starting to get the hang of the split demon technique. However, he still needed to solve the issue of mana utilization. No matter how many times he tried to replicate the mana flow he had witnessed, he always failed, as if he were forgetting something crucial. Frustrated, he sighed and decided to keep practicing, unaware that someone was silently watching him from the shadows. As he prepared to practice again, a figure with long hair rushed toward him from behind and grabbed his sword. Startled, Chiol turned to see a woman demanding to know where he had learned the technique he was practicing. He noticed her dark hair and brown eyes, clear signs that she was a direct descendant of the esteemed Lee clan. Confused, he asked who she was, which seemed to surprise her. She wondered aloud how he didn't recognize her, then guessed it might be because she rarely left her quarters. She introduced herself as Lee Chiol, shaking his hand with such enthusiasm that it caused him to spin around. Chiol realized she was his youngest aunt and remembered Taehong mentioning in his past life that Chiol was different from others and that Tactician had disliked her. The realization made his stomach churn, and he suddenly felt dizzy, collapsing to the ground. She remarked that he seemed rather fragile, making him wonder why she didn't consider the possibility that she was simply unnaturally strong. She approached him and asked where he had learned the technique he had been practicing. He countered by asking why she wanted to know. She explained that what he had used was an ancient martial art, and she had a deep fascination with old martial arts, which was why she was curious. She pulled a book from her pocket, mentioning that ancient monsters had lived long ago as well, and handed it to him as a gift. Chiol accepted it and opened it as she instructed. He noticed the handwriting was difficult to read, but he could tell it contained information about mana techniques and martial arts. The content seemed advanced, making it hard for him to fully grasp. This led him to question the rumors about Chiol, realizing they might not be entirely true. He stopped at one page and asked her what it was about. Excited, she leaned over to look and explained that it described old mana techniques based on mana paths rather than mana circles. She added that in the past, mana techniques relied solely on mana paths, unlike modern techniques that stored mana in the heart. She questioned whether it was fair to dismiss the old techniques as outdated. Chiol was surprised by her perspective, as he had never considered it before. She went on to explain that she believed the ancient mana techniques were superior to modern ones, which was why so few records of them remained. She had been researching amplification and transformation techniques for years. Hearing her explanation, Chiol realized that the technique described in the book was similar to the one used by the man in his vision, Boundless's mana technique. He handed the book back to Kyungha and walked to the center of the training hall, telling her to wait a moment. Confused, she asked what he was doing. Chiol picked up his sword and began spreading his mana from the mana circle throughout his body. He then rejected the mana's attempt to return to the mana circle, focusing solely on utilizing the mana paths. When he opened his eyes, he knew he had finally understood the mana utilization technique the man had used. Confident, he lifted his sword and swung it down, slashing the ground in front of him in a perfect, clean line. The force of the strike shattered the ground, leaving both Chiol and Kyungha stunned. Chiol was thrilled that he had succeeded, but Kyungha rushed over and grabbed him, demanding to know if it was an amplification technique. He confirmed it, and she pressed him for details on how he had done it. He simply replied that he had figured it out, which she accepted, but still asked how. He countered by asking why he had to tell her. She shouted that he had used the notebook she gave him to understand it, and that notebook contained everything she had studied. She then calmly explained that she had spent over 10 years searching for a way to use the technique, even after being kicked out of the clan. She asked what she needed to do for him to share his knowledge. Chiol hesitated for a moment before telling her she would need to promise him 3 things. She asked what they were, and he explained the first. She must not talk to others about him unless he gave her permission, even if it was his eldest brother or father. Confused, she asked why. He explained that he disliked the idea of people discussing him, to which she agreed, noting that she felt the same way. Her expression turned sad as she spoke. Chiol continued, stating that the second condition was that she must never lie to him, as they needed to trust each other. He promised to be truthful with her as well. Though frustrated, she agreed, and asked what the final condition was. 1 year later, Chiol was in the training ground when Gawa rushed toward him in a panic, clutching a letter. Kyungha, who was nearby, looked at Gawa curiously as Chiol asked what had brought her there. Gawa, out of breath, handed him the letter and urged him to read it. Kyungha, equally confused, asked what it was. Chiol opened the envelope and found a summons order for the naming ceremony, scheduled for the 10th of September at the Central Training Hall. The letter was signed by Myungjung as a proxy, making Chiol wonder if Taishan was away. He hadn't heard about any expeditions or absences, but before he could dwell on it, he noticed Kyungha trembling beside him. Kyungha furiously demanded to know why the naming ceremony summons had arrived now. Chiol asked her what was wrong, and she explained that she had finally started to grasp their research and needed his guidance more than ever. She shouted that if he attended the naming ceremony, he would have to stay for a while, leaving her without his help. She begged him not to go, but Chiol remained silent, watching as his aunt threw a tantrum. Over the past year, Chiol and Kyungha had been deeply immersed in researching mana techniques. They had studied modern mana techniques, which used the mana circle as the core, and ancient mana techniques, which relied on the mana paths. They had also explored a new type of mana technique that combined the two. Kyungha had shared that successfully merging modern and ancient techniques was her dream. Thanks to their year of research, Chiol had discovered that accumulating mana, transforming its traits in the mana circle, and using the mana paths to control and utilize it, allowed him to wield mana far more efficiently than others his age. Kyungha, still upset, stuttered as she asked if he really had to go and if he couldn't skip the ceremony, arguing that their research was more important. Chiol calmly replied that she knew he had no choice but to attend. Her disappointment deepened, but he assured her that it wouldn't take long and that he intended to continue their work. Kyungha, confused, asked how he planned to balance the demanding lessons of the naming ceremony with their research. Chiol smirked and explained that he would proceed with both the mana technique training and the recovery of ancient techniques simultaneously. Later, Chiol entered the training tube alongside Hua. The instructor informed them that their training for the day would involve enduring magic attacks for 30 minutes. Zhang Wook, the Blood Tiger Squad's group leader and instructor, observed Chiol closely. He noticed something unusual. Chiol was deflecting every attack, even though Wook had expected him to fail immediately, given that Chiol had never received basic training. Wook realized that Chiol was using advanced mana techniques to deflect the attacks. As he watched, he noticed the intensity in Chiol's eyes and realized that Chiol was testing himself, comparing his skills to Hua's to gauge his own level. Wook also observed that Chiol was subtly pushing for higher level lessons, despite being only 10 years old and an illegitimate child. Wook questioned whether it was fair to label Chiol as just an illegitimate child, given his evident talent. Feeling a pang of guilt, Wook clenched his fist and vowed to reflect on his past behavior. He resolved to teach Chiol everything he could, going beyond the standard lessons for the naming ceremony. 30 minutes later, the training ended. Chiol stretched his body, thinking how insane it was for the Lee clan to subject children to a device that constantly activated magic attacks to build resistance. As he moved his shoulders, he noticed a change in Wook's tone toward him, though he didn't expect an apology. Deciding not to dwell on it, Chiol began walking to rest, unaware that someone was hiding nearby. Suddenly, Hua lunged at him, but he blocked her attack effortlessly. Hua called him a bastard and demanded they talk. Chiol pushed her hand away and asked what she was trying to do. Hua warned him to watch his mouth, reminding him that she was a legitimate child while he was not. Chiol simply turned around, not wanting to deal with Hua, and told her he didn't have time to talk. His dismissive attitude shocked and angered her. In a fit of rage, she launched her fist at him, shouting for him not to ignore her. Chiol was startled to see her using mana and frustrated that she wouldn't leave him alone when he just wanted to walk away. He dodged her attack and grabbed her collar with swift precision, holding it tightly and making her tremble in pain. He told her that if she wanted to whine and cry, she should do so in her mother's arms, as he was too busy to deal with her. He released her and turned to leave but paused when she shouted that everything was his fault. She blamed him for the constant comparisons she faced since the steel selection ritual, where his performance had overshadowed hers. She screamed at him to disappear like any other illegitimate child, claiming it wasn't fair that she couldn't sleep, had no time for snacks, and was always training, while he seemed to excel effortlessly. She was about to say more but stopped herself, realizing she had almost revealed too much about her mother's demands. Chiol calmly told her it must be convenient to blame others for her struggles. He reminded her that, as a so-called bastard child, he didn't have the luxury of making excuses. He added that if she couldn't sleep, she should stay awake. If she couldn't catch up to him even by skipping snacks, she should stop eating altogether. And if she resented him, she should do whatever it took to surpass him. He concluded that if she ever managed to surpass him, he would apologize, as that was how their family operated. Hua clenched her fists, calling him an arrogant bastard, and vowed to outperform him at the naming ceremony. She swore she would make him beg for forgiveness and warned him not to forget it. Chiol quietly walked away with a smile but stopped to look back at her, telling her he would look forward to it. A moment later, in the Zone 7 training hall, Hua was training intensely. Her handmaid noticed someone approaching and greeted Huayan, the matriarch of the Lee clan. Huayan ordered the maid to leave, as she needed to speak with her daughter. The maid complied, and Huayan entered the training hall, where Hua was pushing herself to her limits. Huayan asked what Hua was doing, and Hua, startled, stammered that she was training. Huayan reminded her that she had heard about her recent loss and expressed disappointment, saying she had expected Hua to crush her rivals. She added that if Hua was only training to avoid being lectured, she might as well quit, as she didn't even feel like lecturing her anymore. Hua explained that she wasn't training because of her mother's expectations, but because she wanted to. She declared that she would surpass Chiol no matter what, not because she was told to, but because she was determined to do so on her own. Huayan, visibly angered, asked if Hua was saying she was motivated by a bastard child. Hua tried to explain but couldn't find the words. Huayan reminded her that, as a legitimate child of the Lee clan, her standing was fundamentally different from Chiol's. Surpassing him should have been a given, yet here she was, being driven by him. Huayan then handed Hua a small bottle, explaining that it contained a lethal poison called dreamlike trance. She placed it in Hua's hand and walked past her, coldly stating that if Hua couldn't surpass Chiol, she should trample him instead, as that was their family's way. Without another word, Huayan left. The next day, in Chiol's palace, Gawa stared at the computer screen, stuttering in disbelief. She checked his 14th report card again, which showed all ranks at the top. Chiol asked her what she thought and if she was finally free of worries. Overwhelmed, Gawa hugged him tightly, saying she hadn't done much for him, yet he had achieved so much. Chiol hugged her back and told her not to say such things. Suddenly, they both froze when they heard a loud noise outside. Gyungha burst into the room excitedly, shouting that it was time to train. Chiol replied that he had just finished training, but Gyungha insisted they had to go, claiming that training in mana arts would help relieve his fatigue. Chiol pointed out that he had never heard of such an effect, causing Gyungha to stutter and look around nervously as she insisted it was true. Sighing, Chiol told her he had something to show her. He revealed his progress, shocking her when she realized he had attained his first star. Mana arts training typically involved 3 stages. The Iron Body stage, where practitioners strengthened their bodies, the Qigong stage, where they altered the nature of their mana, and the Extraordinary Ability stage, where they demonstrated supernatural abilities through mana. However, Gyungha's mana arts were different. Even at the same stage, practitioners could exhibit unique abilities, which was why her system was divided into stages of stars, rather than the traditional progression. Gyungha examined Chiol to confirm his achievement and praised him for reaching 1 star. She asked if it had been awkward learning to use his mana paths, admitting she had thought it would take him another year. Chiol explained that he had learned to use them during his lessons, though the training had been grueling. He mentioned that he had struggled with mana control, and that the balance between his mana circle and mana paths had nearly shattered. He realized that mana flows naturally like water, and that the body itself acts as a vessel for mana. Gyungha looked at her hand and told him she believed she could achieve the same, though it might take time. Chiol felt relieved that she had finally grasped the concept. Gyungha hugged him tightly, thanking him for his guidance. Chiol screamed in pain, telling her she was breaking his ribs. She let him go and confidently declared that they should aim for 2 stars next. Chiol, lying on the ground in pain, thought he might die from her enthusiasm. Gyungha explained that what he had achieved was 1 star and asked if he understood how it differed from the traditional first stage. He confirmed he did. She then asked what he thought his greatest strength was. Before he could answer, she interrupted, saying she didn't think he was right. Startled, Chiol insisted she had never seen him in swordsmanship training. Gyungha admitted she had watched him a few times out of boredom, but clarified that she believed his greatest ability was his talent for mana arts. She explained that his skill in mana arts was so extraordinary that it overshadowed everything else, including his swordsmanship. She added that no one had ever been able to follow her mana arts teachings before, which confused Chiol, as he had been ridiculed in his past life for his inability to use mana. Gyungha concluded that attaining 2 stars wouldn't be difficult for him, and that if he succeeded, the naming ceremony would be a piece of cake. Gyungha excitedly told Chiol that from then on, she would teach him proper techniques, and he needed to focus. Chiol agreed and stood up, asking Gyungha what was beside her. She glanced at the box next to her and touched it, then suddenly threw something at him. The object grazed his face and destroyed the wall behind him. Gyungha smiled and explained that they were metal marbles. She emphasized that he needed to learn to move while releasing mana, as using mana arts while stationary was no different from dead mana arts. She grabbed a handful of marbles and asked if they should begin the training, leaving Chiol slightly worried. The next day, in the training hall, Chiol and Hua stood facing a man who introduced himself as Lee Jungkwan, the leader of the Blood Tiger Squad. Jungkwon informed them that he would be teaching them the esteemed Lee clan's secret techniques. He instructed them to choose the weapons they used and return within 1 minute, warning them not to dawdle. Both Chiol and Hwa agreed and rushed off. Hwa glanced at Chiol worriedly, which annoyed him. He asked her what she was staring at and if she had something to say. Startled, Hwa denied staring and claimed she had nothing to say. She then whispered, asking if he used a sword. Chiol replied no, and grabbed several weapons instead. Hwa was confused, pointing out that he always used a sword during weapons training, but Chiol ignored her and walked back to the stage. Jungkwon noticed Chiol holding multiple weapons and asked what he was doing. Chiol explained that Jungkwon had told them to choose a weapon and return, so he had followed the instruction. Jungkwon reminded him that he had asked for the weapon they used, but Chiol insisted that the weapons he held were the ones he used. Jungkwon was left speechless and muttered that he had thought Chiol wasn't dumb, but now realized he was a complete idiot. As Jungkwon walked a short distance away, he picked up a spear and told them to pay close attention to what he was about to say. He clarified that while he had promised to teach them the clan's secret techniques, he wouldn't be teaching them postures or skills. Instead, he explained that the Lee clan's secret arts, known as enlightenment, required a strong foundation and the awakening of the sixth sense dormant in their blood. Jungkwon warned them not to struggle too much when awakening their sixth sense. Hwa, worried, asked what Jungkwon was going to do. Chiol told her to prepare herself if she didn't want to be knocked unconscious immediately. Before they could react, Jungkwon appeared beside Chiol in an instant. Shocked, Chiol barely managed to deflect Jungkwon's spear strike, though the force pushed him back. Jungkwon was impressed that Chiol had blocked the attack. Chiol landed safely on the ground, cursing under his breath that he had to go through this crazy training again. He stood up, positioning his feet firmly, determined to approach this training differently than in his past life. With a focused expression, he dashed toward Jungkwon, vowing that this time things would be different. Weeks passed, but Chiol continued to be outmatched by Jungkwon. During one session, Hwa dashed from behind to attack, but before she could get close, Jungkwon spun his spear and struck her back, sending her crashing to the floor. It had been a month since they began training with Jungkwon, and the intensity of the sessions left them with broken bones and internal injuries. Chiol knew this wasn't the kind of training suitable for 10-year-olds, but he refused to complain. He was starting to get the hang of it, and that was enough motivation to keep going. Later, Hwa woke up screaming and asked if she had passed out again. Chiol confirmed it was her 22nd time, adding that he had only passed out 16 times. Frustrated, he shouted that she wouldn't pass out if she were better prepared. Jungkwon observed them, noting that Hwa had an incredibly sturdy body. Despite his heart attacks, she had never sustained serious injuries. Jungkwon also realized that Chiol was something special. Initially, he had thought Chiol was foolish for bringing an armful of weapons, but he now saw that Chiol was proficient with all of them, utilizing each one effectively. Jungkwon smiled, intrigued by Chiol's progress over the past month. He ordered them to resume training and return to their positions. Hours later, both Chiol and Hwa were exhausted. Chiol called out to Hwa, and she asked what he wanted. He told her he would give her a signal and asked her to block Jungkwon just once for him. Hwa questioned why she should help him, and Chiol replied that she didn't have to if she didn't want to, but he thought they could land a solid attack together. Hwa hesitated but eventually asked if he was sure about the plan. Chiol confidently confirmed. Hwa then dashed toward Jungkwon, shouting that he would pay for his earlier strike. Chiol followed, knowing that at his current skill level, he stood no chance of winning alone. Their only advantage was their numbers. Jungkwon acknowledged their teamwork, spinning his spear as he prepared to counter. Chiol stabbed at Jungkwon's head, but Jungkwon easily dodged and deflected the attack. This was part of Chiol's plan. Impressed by Chiol's skill, Jungkwon dashed toward him. Chiol swung his spear and shouted for Hwa to act. Hwa appeared from above, swinging her sword at Jungkwon. While Jungkwon was distracted, Chiol threw his spear aside and grabbed a nearby sword, infusing it with his mana. He knew the only way to land a proper attack was to use the ultimate technique he had learned from Boundless. Lifting his feet off the ground, he dashed forward, executing the split demon technique. Jungkwon was shocked by Chiol's sudden attack. As Chiol closed in, he released his sword and aimed a punch at Jungkwon's head, believing it would work. He struck with all his might, feeling a surge of pride, but Jungkwon still managed to block it. With a forceful motion, Jungkwon dragged Chiol forward and hurled him into a wall. The impact caused Chiol to cough up blood and scream in pain. Jungkwon congratulated Chiol on awakening his sixth sense after 37 days of training. He then effortlessly dodged Hwa's sneak attack, telling her she still had a long way to go. Hwa landed next to Chiol and collapsed as well. Jungkwon walked away with a smile, announcing that their training for the day was over. A few minutes later, both Chiol and Hwa woke up. Hwa angrily demanded to know what had gone wrong with his plan, shouting that she had trusted him. Meanwhile, Jungkwon examined his palm, noticing a small injury. He realized Chiol had managed to land a hit despite Jungkwon's use of mana, something he had vowed not to do during their training. Jungkwon acknowledged that Chiol had the ability to judge when to abandon an attack and possessed excellent combat sense. He knew this would make the elders of the household wary of Chiol in the future. Hwa awakened her sixth sense on the 47th day, and both she and Chiol graduated from Jungkwon's lessons. Chiol used his remaining time to rest and review what he had learned. During this period, his eldest brother, Lee Myungjung, visited him. Myungjung, known as the Twin Star, was nearly a 2-end rank magician and a 2-end rank martial artist. While others admired and feared him, Chiol saw Myungjung as his one true brother. Myungjung apologized for not being able to pay much attention to Chiol lately due to his busy schedule. Chiol assured him it was fine. Myungjung noted that it was their first meeting, yet Chiol recognized him immediately. Chiol confirmed this, explaining that even though they were half-brothers, he couldn't possibly not know the face of his eldest brother. Myungjung gently corrected him, saying they might have different mothers, but Chiol was as much his brother as any of their siblings. He thought to himself that Chiol, despite not having gone through his naming ceremony, seemed unusually harsh on himself. Chiol apologized, but Myungjung told him there was no need and that he didn't have to be so formal, as they were brothers. Chiol warmly agreed, realizing that Myungjung had always been kind, even in his younger years. Myungjung then pulled something from his pocket, explaining it was a gift to commemorate their first meeting. He had received it when he was admitted to France's Eiffel Magic University, but believed Chiol would find more use for it. He handed Chiol a potion called Nectar, the wine of the gods, a high-tier miracle medicine produced in limited quantities, only 500 milliliters per year, in France's magic tower. Chiol accepted it and thanked Myungjung, surprising him. Myungjung remarked that Chiol was different from their other siblings, who often saw him as a rival. He expressed relief that Chiol didn't view him that way, though he was used to such dynamics. Chiol, however, clarified that Myungjung was mistaken. He explained that he did see Myungjung as a rival because he too was a member of the Lee clan. He added brightly that no one knew if he might grow up to be Myungjung's greatest rival, but he hoped it would be a healthy competition. Myungjung laughed heartily at this, patting Chiol's head and saying he looked forward to the day Chiol became his biggest rival. Chiol confidently agreed, silently swearing to protect his older brother, who genuinely cared for him in this life. A few days later, the day of the second trial of the esteemed Lee clan's naming ceremony arrived. Chiol and the others were taken to Red and Blue Island, a unique landmass where the terrain's color shifted based on the mana concentration in the atmosphere. This island had served as the site for the clan's naming ceremonies since ancient times. Their guide explained that they would need to survive on the island for 3 weeks to prove themselves. He handed them devices to track their locations, instructing them to keep the devices on at all times. After they put on the devices, the guide added that the trial chamber would remain open for 2 days following the 3-week period. Once the instructions were complete, they disembarked from the boat, and the guide wished them luck before departing. Hua told Chiol she had something to say, but he interrupted, noting that she had finally made up her mind. Confused, she asked how he knew she had been trying to say something to him since their training began. Chiol simply stared at her, wondering how he could have missed her obvious behavior. He told her to go ahead and say what was on her mind, promising to at least listen. Hua hesitated but eventually removed her pendant and set it aside, gesturing for Chiol to do the same. He complied, and once both pendants were removed, he asked what she wanted to tell him. Hua pulled out a small vial from her pocket and explained that it contained a poison called dreamlike trance. She revealed that the poison was only effective against children under the age of 15 and would evaporate if exposed to air for more than 5 minutes. However, if ingested, it would cause long-term malfunctions in the victim's mana paths. Chiol asked seriously who had given it to her, but she refused to answer. Instead, she threw the vial onto a rock, causing it to evaporate, and declared that there was no evidence left. She shouted that she would beat him fair and square, without resorting to such underhanded methods, and demanded that he take the trial seriously and give it his all. Chiol was initially stunned, but then smiled, assuring her that he had always planned to do his best, regardless of her actions. Hua praised his determination. She then asked if he was fully equipped, and advised him to challenge the center of the island only after he had acclimated to the environment, as she had heard it was extremely dangerous. Chiol replied that he was aware of the risks and teased her, asking if she was worried about him. Hua shouted that she wasn't worried about him, but was concerned he might die before they could settle their rivalry. Suddenly, a loud growl echoed from the forest ahead, startling both of them. They exchanged a glance, knowing the growl came from deep within the woods. Hua told Chiol not to die and began walking away. As she disappeared into the distance, Chiol felt a pang of guilt, knowing his destination wasn't the outskirts of the island. He clenched his fist, encouraging himself, and set off confidently toward the center of the island, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him. Meanwhile, in the surveillance room, members of the Lee clan were watching Hua on the screen. As expected, she had already completed her first assignment, hunting. They noted that the number of animals she had defeated was impressive, especially for her first practical experience. Chiol-jung remarked that this was only natural, given that Hwa-yeon was her mother, and there was no way Hwa would underperform. He asked if it had been 47 days since the training began, and Jung-kwan confirmed, adding that Hwa hadn't originally been at this level. It had been expected that she would take 2 full months to reach this point. Jung-kwan acknowledged that Hwa had decent talent but emphasized that her rapid improvement was largely due to Chiol's influence, as he had provoked her to push herself harder. Chiol-jung then asked what Chiol was doing. Jung-kwan guessed that Chiol was likely searching for a place to set up a hideout. Chiol-jung criticized Chiol, calling him a coward who chose to hide and run away like a rat. Others joined in, mocking Chiol and expressing embarrassment that he was an offspring of the Lee clan. Myung-jung intervened, ordering them to stop. He explained that finding a hideout in a dangerous environment was a strategic move, not something to ridicule. The others reluctantly agreed, admitting that their expectations had been set high by Hwa's performance. However, Chiol-jung reminded everyone that being average in the esteemed Lee clan was unacceptable, and the others nodded, agreeing that mediocrity was laughable for someone of their lineage. Myung-jung clenched his fists in anger, disgusted that they were mocking a child simply because of his background. He wondered when their clan had fallen so low, but realized it had always been this way. Myung-jung turned his attention back to the screen, watching Chiol and wondering what he was thinking as he headed toward the center of the island. Myung-jung glanced to his side when he heard a noise and noticed Tae-hong nervously biting his nails. Seeing Tae-hong's concern, Myung-jung realized he wasn't the only one worried about Chiol. He couldn't help but wonder what Chiol was planning. Back on the island, Chiol finally found a suitable spot. He set up camp, started a fire, burned medicinal herbs, and blocked the entrance with leaves. The clan members watching the screen were impressed by his concealment skills, but Cheol-jung was shocked when Chiol removed his tracking device and hid it under the leaves. The signal from Chiol's device disappeared, leaving everyone in the surveillance room stunned. Jungkwon burst out laughing, unable to contain his amusement, and shouted that Chiol was as unpredictable as ever. Myungjung and Taehong, however, slapped their foreheads in a mix of worry and frustration. Chiol looked at the hidden devices, thinking there was no reason to let the clan monitor his every move. Now that he was free from surveillance, he could use Boundless without restraint. He activated Boundless, transforming it back into a dagger. Deciding to make the most of his time on the island, he resolved to gather as many resources as possible. However, his attention was drawn to the purple tea he had brewed. It was nearly ready, but its grotesque appearance made him question whether he could bring himself to drink it. No one in their right mind would believe it was made from mana herbs. Mixing the tea in disgust, Chiol reminded himself that in his previous life, he hadn't even had enough money to buy a cheap elixir. At least now, thanks to his time following a druggist, he knew how to make this concoction. He recalled Gyeongha's advice that the red and blue island was rich in mana, making it the perfect place to increase his total mana through mana arts. He guessed that drinking the tea, despite its revolting taste, would likely enhance its effectiveness. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Chiol lifted the bowl and forced himself to drink the tea, fighting the urge to vomit. After finishing it, he threw the empty bowl to the ground, overwhelmed by the hellish taste. With that, Chiol's lonely 3-week struggle on the island began. On the 18th day of the naming ceremony, in Myungjung's office, someone requested permission to enter. Myungjung granted it, and the man apologized for the interruption. Myungjung assured him it was fine, as he suspected the visit was due to bad news. The man, Yoo Jung-hyun, the vice leader of Myungjung's direct affiliate martial artist squad and the Azure Sword Squad, reported that a large vagabond group had entered South Korea's northern regions. Instead of moving through the unexplored regions as expected, they were heading directly south, putting them within 2 days' reach of the Lee clan's monostone mines. Myungjung knew that vagabonds typically avoided direct confrontations, preferring to commit crimes in unexplored regions. He concluded that their sudden shift toward the Lee clan's territory suggested a hidden scheme. Jang Han agreed, adding that while the group appeared to be vagabonds, they might be disguising their true identity, possibly backed by another force. He also shared intelligence indicating that the Nine Dragon Stronghold, a massive organization from Zhongyuan, was moving forces toward the northern border. The Nine Dragon Stronghold and the Lee clan shared a border leading to the unexplored regions, but the Stronghold had a history of provoking the Lee clan by encroaching on their territory. Myungjung suspected that news of Taishin's absence had leaked, making this the perfect time for their enemies to act. He asked Jang Han if the intelligence branch was aware of the situation. Jang Han confirmed that he had discovered the information faster than the branch due to Myungjung's orders to monitor the stronghold closely. Myungjung stood and instructed Jang Han to collaborate with the intelligence branch to gather more details, as he believed there was more to the situation than met the eye. He hoped it was nothing more than a bad feeling, but prepared for the worst. Later that night on the island, a magic circle appeared and activated, cracking open a portal in space. A man holding a weapon emerged, thinking that 2 knights would be enough to eliminate one illegitimate child. The next day, in the heart of the island, a massive 7th-rank monster, the dragon Draco, emerged with a thunderous growl. Chiol, panting and exhausted, faced the beast. Draco gathered flames in its mouth and spewed them toward Chiol, but he remained calm, waiting for the right moment. As the flames neared, he sidestepped at incredible speed and charged toward Draco. Leaping into the air, he raised his sword, releasing a surge of mana, and swung it down with the split demon technique. The attack pierced Draco's head, killing it instantly. Chiol exhaled, steadying himself, and acknowledged that dragons were on a completely different level. He knew that if he had faced Draco when he first arrived on the island, he would have been defeated immediately. It had taken him 19 days to reach the dragon's territory, and he realized staying any longer would be a waste of time. However, there was another reason he had ventured so deep into the island. As he began searching the area, he heard growling nearby and immediately hid behind a large bush. An 8th-rank lizardman emerged, confirming Chiol's suspicions. Something had felt off since the previous day. Lizardmen, which were supposed to appear only on the outskirts of the island, were now in the heart of the territory, attacking and then retreating. Chiol knew lizardmen weren't particularly intelligent, being lower-ranked monsters, and wondered if they were being influenced by an external force. Drawing his sword, he emerged from hiding and attacked. The lizardmen, startled, fled in fear. Chiol beheaded one and let the other escape, confirming that something unusual was happening. He decided to follow the fleeing lizardman. As Chiol trailed the lizardman, he sensed a powerful energy spreading through the area and heard someone commanding monsters. He soon spotted a man sitting in a clearing, remarking that the bloodline of the esteemed Lee clan was peculiar. The lizardman crept behind the man, who continued to muse about how a young boy like Chiol could take on so many monsters alone. The man, trainer Nishiyama Shugo, confidently declared that Chiol was just a child who would fall for such an obvious trap. He patted a small creature sleeping peacefully in his hand, confident that he wouldn't need to resort to his backup plan. Chiol, hidden in the trees above, found the trap blatantly obvious but confirmed his suspicions. He wondered if Shugo was a trainer capable of controlling monsters and how an outsider had infiltrated the island. Realizing that a teleportation spell circle might have been set up, Chiol concluded that a Lee clan member must be involved. Smirking, he considered notifying the household and waiting for reinforcements, but decided it would take too long. Instead, he activated his stealth arts, jumped from the tree, and landed silently. Concealing his presence, he dashed toward Shugo, aiming his sword at the man's back. Unfortunately, the bird on Shogo's hands woke up and let out a loud screech just before Chiol could swing his sword. Shogo immediately turned around, demanding to know when Chiol had appeared. Chiol cursed internally, realizing Shogo had a danger detection artifact, but he didn't stop. He swung his sword down, only for Shugo to deflect it with his staff, pushing Chiol back slightly. Deactivating his stealth art, Chiol stood revealed. Shugo recognized him as the illegitimate child of the esteemed Lee clan, and remarked that Chiol was better than he had anticipated. Chiol fired back, suggesting that perhaps Shugo was just weak, which infuriated him. Shugo shouted for him to shut up and ordered the lizardmen hiding in the bushes to attack. Chiol activated the third form of the 7-star sword and slashed through the lizardmen with his true Azure technique in a single, swift motion. However, he was shocked to find he couldn't move his body. Chains had materialized around him, binding him in place. Shugo laughed, explaining that the array surrounding them was the most advanced type, designed to block the mana circles of martial artists. He taunted Chiol, calling him a powerless kid without mana and declaring that he would meet a pathetic end. Shugo turned to walk away, ordering the lizardmen to finish Chiol off. But Chiol wasn't done yet. He focused his mana into his pathways, gathering a small amount in his feet. With a powerful jump, he shattered the arrays holding him and sent the lizardmen flying. He dashed toward Shugo, who was still walking away, and leaped around him, landing in front of the stunned trainer. Chiol teased Shugo, asking if he had given up on running. Shugo demanded to know how Chiol had broken free, but Chiol refused to answer. Instead, he informed Shugo that he had already notified the household about his presence and advised him to surrender. Shugo laughed, dismissing the warning and shouting that he would eliminate Chiol and regain his freedom. Chiol was confused by the statement, but before he could react, a massive shadow loomed over him. Something enormous kicked him, breaking his sword and sending him crashing into a tree. The impact forced blood from his mouth as he collapsed to the ground in pain. The monster stood before him, growling menacingly. Chiol looked up and realized it was the Red and Blue Island's guardian, Turtlehead Mountain, a third-rank monster, and a living nightmare. He sat up, trembling, and glared at Shugo, wondering if the third-rate trainer had somehow tamed such a beast. Shugo understood his glare and admitted that while he didn't have perfect control over Turtlehead Mountain, it would certainly carry out the order to kill Chiol. Shugo reached into his sleeve and pulled out a handful of talismans. He tells Chiol to give up and accept his fate, then throws the talismans toward him. Then Shugo vanishes. Chiol forced himself to stay calm, realizing that if Shugo didn't have perfect control over Turtlehead Mountain, his best chance was to target the trainer directly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a medicine ball, knowing it was his only option to stand a chance against the monstrous guardian. He had prepared it as a last resort but never expected to use it under such dire circumstances. The medicine, a banned mana booster, was known for its intense side effects, which often outweighed its benefits. Without hesitation, Chiol consumed it, feeling a surge of mana coursing through his body. The energy became visible, swirling around him and his weapon, boundless. He recalled the technique Gyeongha had taught him, one to be used only in the most dangerous situations. Focusing on his sword, he wrapped his mana around it and activated the heaven-defying technique. His eyes widened as he leaped forward, slashing at Turtlehead Mountain. The attack caused the monster to scream in pain, though it left no visible damage. Chiol landed on the ground, realizing his strike had at least halted the beast's advance. He raised his sword again, determined to finish it with his next attack. However, Turtlehead Mountain let out a deafening roar that shook the entire island, releasing a powerful pressure wave. Chiol recognized it as the monster's signature ability, Fear, which paralyzed its victims with overwhelming terror. He cursed as the mana waves immobilized him, but fortunately, his dark energy activated, resisting the fear effect. Summoning all his strength, he dashed forward and swung his sword with everything he had, using Boundless's first technique, Split Demon. The strike landed on the monster's neck, enraging it further. Turtlehead Mountain unleashed another wave of fear, this time from above, clearing the dark sky and intensifying the pressure. Chiol coughed up blood and dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by the pain. He knew he didn't have much time. The side effects of the mana booster and the heaven-defying technique were taking their toll. Forcing himself to stand, he clutched his chest and ran, knowing he had only 10 seconds left to find Shugo. As the seconds ticked down, he scanned his surroundings and noticed a thread on the ground. With 3 seconds remaining, he followed the thread into a small path, where he found Shugo hiding. Shugo heard his footsteps and turned, demanding to know how Chiol had found him. Chiol didn't respond, instead thrusting his sword forward. Shugo leaped back, but Chiol extended his sword with a surge of mana, slashing Shugo in the final second. Exhausted, Chiol released his sword and collapsed to his knees, trembling in pain. He quickly searched his jacket, knowing he needed to stabilize himself before passing out. He pulled out the nectar potion, remembering Gyeongha's advice to drink it if he ever used the heaven-defying technique. He consumed the potion, feeling its effects immediately. Chiol tried to stand, knowing he had to deal with Shugo before any monsters arrived, but his body gave out. He lost consciousness and fell to the ground, the battle taking its final toll. A moment later, Chiol opened his eyes to find himself surrounded by whiteness. He wondered where he was and what had happened to Shugo and Turtlehead Mountain. Before he could gather his thoughts, a searing pain shot through his body as his dark energy surged uncontrollably. He felt as though his entire body was falling apart. Then, a massive eye appeared, staring down at him. It spoke, explaining that the substances he had consumed were too dangerous for humans, yet both were now inside him. Turtlehead Mountain admitted it had hoped Chiol wouldn't wake up, but decided to offer him something instead. It tossed a purple beehive-like object in front of him, the purple glowstone of clarity. The monster told him he wasn't meant to eat it, rather it would consume him. It urged him to grow stronger so he wouldn't be devoured by time. As Chiol lost consciousness again, he saw the guardian of the Red and Blue Island walking away. When Chiol woke up again, he saw Hua standing nearby. He acted disgusted at the sight of her, which angered her. She reminded him that she was older and should be respected, but decided to let it slide since he wasn't in good condition. She asked how he was feeling. Chiol closed his eyes, assessing his body. His mana had increased significantly, but his body was a mess. broken mana paths, twisted intestines, fractured bones, and damaged muscles. Despite this, he told Hua it wasn't that bad, which shocked her. She shouted that it was, in fact, very bad. Chiol looked at Hua, wondering if he had hurt his head. He recalled that the purple glowstone of clarity was something Hua was supposed to take. It was a miraculous medicine that reinforced the body, increased mana, and granted resistance to poisons and curses, something he had desperately wanted. He felt a pang of guilt for Hua, realizing she had missed out on the opportunity. Sitting up, Chiol asked Hua what she was doing there. Before she could answer, Myungjung rushed over, calling his name in concern. Myungjung asked if he was alright and insisted he treat his mana first, handing him a potion. Chiol assured him he was fine and drank the potion while Myungjung watched with worry. Myungjung then asked Hua to excuse them for a moment. Once she was out of earshot, Myungjung told Chiol that if he had died, he would have annihilated Shogo and every organization involved, no matter their size or influence. Chiol laughed, saying it was nice to hear. Myungjung acknowledged that Chiol's actions were something every martial artist should aspire to emulate. However, as his older brother, he couldn't view it positively. Chiol shyly apologized, explaining that he hadn't expected Turtlehead Mountain to appear. If he had known, he would have waited for a better opportunity. Myungjung sighed in relief, glad that Chiol understood the difference between arrogance and confidence. Chiol then told Myungjung that since he had dealt with Shogo, he assumed he had the right to know the details. Myungjung explained that Shogo was a nearly 5th rank sorcerer who had dabbled in Onmyoto. He had been expelled for attempting to use banned sorcery, and must have activated advanced sorcery while Turtlehead Mountain was dormant. Myungjung speculated that Shogo had tried to eliminate Chiol and make it look like a monster's doing. Chiol asked if Myungjung had figured out who was behind the plot. Myungjung admitted it would be difficult to determine at the moment. Chiol then suggested that he wasn't the final target. They were after him to damage his reputation. He believed their goal was to portray him as incompetent, unable to detect invaders or respond to urgent situations. Myungjung asked why he thought that, and Chiol explained that harming his standing within the clan seemed to be the ultimate objective. Myungjung agreed with Chiol's assessment and asked what he should do. Chiol inquired if Myungjung was alright, and Myungjung patted his head, reassuring him that he was fine. While the situation might slightly tarnish his image, it wouldn't make a significant difference. Myungjung added that he couldn't leave his position vacant for long and needed to return soon. However, Chiol grabbed Myungjung's hand and proposed a solution. He suggested they claim that Myungjung had predicted the trainer's invasion and given Chiol orders in advance. Chiol offered to testify accordingly, which would make it seem like Myungjung had anticipated the threat even before the intelligence branch could detect it. Myungjung initially disagreed, arguing that it would be better for Chiol to tell the truth. However, Chiol explained that if he did, people would view him as competition and become more wary of him. Myungjung understood the logic and realized the plan would benefit both of them. He agreed and asked what Chiol wanted in return. Chiol requested a 3-day entry permit to the library. Myungjung laughed, calling him an arrogant little kid, but ultimately agreed. He thanked Chiol and shook his hand, though Chiol insisted there was no need for gratitude since the arrangement benefited them both. Myungjung patted Chiol's shoulder, expressing confidence that Chiol would have found a way to overcome the situation even without his help. Before Chiol could respond, Myungjung's phone rang. He explained that it was likely the Azure Sword Squad, meaning he had to leave immediately. Chiol agreed, and as Myungjung prepared to depart, he tossed something to Chiol. Catching it, Chiol realized it was boundless, which surprised him. Myungjung teleported away, promising to keep their agreement a secret. Chiol smiled, confirming that Myungjung was indeed clever. Later, as Chiol put on his jacket, Hua approached him, noting that his conversation with Myungjung seemed to have gone well. Chiol confirmed it had. Hua then asked which test he planned to take, explaining that all options should be open since the 3-week period had ended. Chiol deflected the question, asking Hua what she would choose instead. Annoyed, Hua shouted that she had asked first, but Chiol insisted he would answer if she did. Hua proudly declared she would choose the most difficult test and asked Chiol what he planned to do. He replied that he would select the Hall of Fighting, which confused her. She asked if such a test existed and whether it was located in the outskirts. Chiol confirmed it was, surprising her. Hua expressed disappointment, saying she had expected more from him. She thought Chiol was better than the others, even better than her, but now felt there was no point in talking to him. She turned and walked away, convinced that Chiol was taking the easy route due to the prejudice that test difficulty depended on location. Chiol, however, didn't care about her opinion and walked in a different direction. Hours later, as the sun began to rise, Chiol was still searching for the hidden cave that served as the second assignment for the naming ceremony, the Hall of Fighting. He eventually found it and lit a torch to illuminate the interior. The cave appeared to be an ordinary wall at first glance, but Chiol knew better. He drew his sword and slashed the wall repeatedly, revealing a massive gate hidden behind it. Smiling, Chiol knew he had found what he was looking for. Chiol slashed his palm, infused his blood with mana, and splattered it onto the gate. The gate opened, revealing a sword at the center of the chamber. He stepped inside and approached the sword, pouring his blood into a bowl and declaring that he accepted the challenge of the forefather as a descendant of the esteemed Lee clan. He begged the forefather to heed his request, and as his blood touched the bowl, a bright smoke emerged. The smoke revealed that the Hall of Fighting had only one challenge: to win a battle against oneself. The smoke then formed an illusionary copy of Chiol. Chiol knew he had unlimited attempts and couldn't leave until he succeeded. He drew his sword, ready to begin, but before he could react, his illusion dashed forward and decapitated him. His head fell cleanly from his body as he wondered what had just happened. Moments later, he woke up in a panic, clutching his neck. He checked himself, realizing it had been an illusion, though it felt terrifyingly real. He understood that most people would go insane from such an experience. Staring at his illusion, he questioned whether it was truly a reflection of his potential. If the Hall of Fighting could bring out 100% of his abilities, the illusion should be capable of using skills he hadn't yet mastered. Yet, if that were the case, he should have been able to block the attack. Determined, he positioned himself and shouted for another attempt. However, the results were brutal. In his third attempt, his abdomen was pierced. In his fifth attempt, he deflected the illusion's sword but was choked to death. By his 10th attempt, his head was cut off again. After countless tries, Chiol finally managed to deflect his illusion's attacks and prolong the fight. Catching his breath, he reflected on how many attempts it had taken, though he had lost count. He was relieved to have finally grasped the illusion's patterns and learned everything about himself. He realized his greatest strengths were his flexibility, his ability to overcome irregularities, and his freedom to break through expectations. Switching to a long spear, Chiol charged at his illusion, which mirrored his weapon choice. They clashed, exchanging blows and adapting their tactics. Chiol noticed that the more they fought, the more similar they became. Eventually, they locked weapons in a stalemate, but the illusion broke free, switched back to a sword, and rushed at him, piercing his abdomen. Chiol, however, smirked and called the illusion stupid. Grabbing its arm, he raised his sword and unleashed the split demon technique, shattering the ground behind the illusion. The illusion dissolved into the air, but not before giving him a proud smile. Chiol knew that passing the Hall of Fighting would grant him a hidden ability of the Lee clan. In his past life, he had gained Reinforce, the most common ability. As mana spread around him, healing his injuries, he wondered what ability he would receive this time. When the ability manifested, he was surprised by what he saw. Hours later, outside the Hall of Fighting, members of the Lee clan waited anxiously. Taehong sighed, worried that Chiol hadn't emerged yet. He muttered about how many incidents Chiol had caused during the naming ceremony. Suddenly, someone shouted that there had been a change in mana density and the gate was opening. They watched as Chiol stumbled out, exhausted. Taehong rushed to catch him, shouting for him to wake up. With dry lips, Chiol begged for water and food before collapsing into a deep sleep. Taehong, both relieved and annoyed, shouted angrily, calling him a fucking bastard. The next day, Chiol was back at his palace. Gawa cried as she hugged him, scolding him for challenging the ancient Hall of Fighting created by the forefather on Turtlehead Mountain. Chiol calmly told her he was covered in dirt and had been unconscious for a month. Gawa gently held his face, admitting she had planned to scold him but was just glad he was back. She wiped her tears and promised to prepare a bath and food for him. Before leaving, Chiol asked where Gyeongha was, expecting her to be the first to greet him. Gawa hesitated, causing Chiol to worry and ask what was wrong. A moment later, after eating and washing up, Chiol went to meet Gyeongha. She greeted him cheerfully, but he was frustrated to see her in prison. He asked what had happened, but she simply apologized and said she was glad to see he was fine. Gyeongha then excitedly asked how he had managed to increase his total mana, as his body shouldn't have been able to handle such a surge. She told him to sit down so they could talk, but he calmly called her name instead. Gyeongha scratched her head and assured him she was fine. Chiol knew she had gone too far for him, causing a scene in front of the elders and his eldest brother, blaming them and shouting that they were repeating the same mistakes as always. Gyeongha apologized, explaining that whenever she thought about people causing trouble for him, she couldn't hold back her anger. The thought of not being able to see him again made her furious, and she felt as though something was choking her. Chiol was startled by her words. Though he still couldn't fully trust Gyeongha, he realized he had started to see her as part of his family. Sighing, he decided to accept it. Before leaving, he told Gyeongha he would get her out soon and asked her to wait a little longer. Gyeongha, confused, urged him not to push himself. Chiol assured her he wouldn't and promised she would be free soon. As he walked out the door, he told her he would visit her again. Later that night, at the airport, the Lee clan members watched as an airplane landed. The stairs were lowered and the door opened. Hwayeon and the Lee clan children waited outside as Taechan stepped out. They welcomed him back, and Taechan thanked Hwayeon for waiting, though she insisted it hadn't been long. She informed him that she had prepared hot spring water and a meal for him to enjoy. Taechan acknowledged her efforts, and Chiol observed him, noting how strong Taechan had become since the naming ceremony incident. Yet Chiol still couldn't gauge the difference in their strength. Taechan glanced at him briefly before looking away, leaving Chiol wondering if their eyes had met. Taechan then paused and reminded everyone that he didn't need someone who refused to fight for the family. He added that only one of his children seemed to have the desire to surpass him. The others were startled, asking who Taechan was referring to. Chiol sighed, realizing that despite hiding his emotions well, Taechan had still read his thoughts. Later, in the esteemed Lee clan banquet hall, members of the clan gathered. Chiol stood to the side, noting that the banquet was unusually grand for a naming ceremony. He guessed it might be because such events were rare for the Lee clan. As he observed the attendees, he recognized a man known as the youngest leader of a magic tower and the vice chief of Onmyodo. While Chiol was busy identifying the notable figures, Butler Choi approached him. Choi gracefully informed him that the patriarch was looking for him. Chiol asked for confirmation, and Choi assured him it was true, guiding him to Taechan. Chiol followed, wondering why Taechan had summoned him personally. He hoped it wasn't anything too serious. Chiol and Butler Choi arrived at the location where Taechan was waiting. Chiol respectfully greeted Taechan and was surprised to see Myeongjung standing beside him. He quickly realized why he had been summoned. Taechan explained that they were there to discuss the naming ceremony. He mentioned that, according to Myeongjung, Chiol had been ordered to capture an outsider and had taken the initiative to handle the situation. Chiol, knowing Taechan was already aware of the truth, confirmed it. He explained that he had offered a deal to Myeongjung to prevent potential problems in exchange for 3 days of access to the library. Taechan acknowledged the false reports but warned Chiol there would be no next time. Chiol bowed and assured him he understood. Taechan then turned to Myeongjung, warning him to expect an appropriate punishment soon. He ordered Myeongjung to return to the banquet hall and oversee the event, as it was his responsibility. Myeongjung agreed and before leaving smiled warmly at Chiol, who hoped his brother would be all right. Taechan told Chiol that, excluding the false report, his handling of the incident was commendable. He assured Chiol he would receive the reward he had negotiated with Myungjung. Additionally, Tactician offered another reward for discovering the Hall of Fighting. Chiol was surprised and presented his conditions for the rewards. Later, Tactician addressed the gathered guests, thanking them for attending the banquet. He explained that the event was held to celebrate and bless two children, Chiol and Hwa. Both knelt in the center of the hall as Tactician announced the start of the naming ceremony. He called Hwa to the stage first, declaring that as she had been chosen by the Holy Sword, she would always light the way for others. In hopes of guiding her along this path of light, Tactician bestowed upon her the name Seohyun. Hwa, overjoyed, thanked her father. Tactician then called Chiol to the stage. As Chiol walked forward, he noticed the atmosphere was entirely different from the steel selection ritual, though it made no difference to him. Tactician spoke of Chiol's intelligence, strength, and flexibility, comparing him to a master blacksmith forging steel into blades. He praised Chiol for training relentlessly to reach his potential, and declared there was no better way to describe him. With a snap of his fingers, a banner unfurled, revealing Chiol's name. Tactician announced that he had given Chiol the name Chiol. Chiol remembered that in his past life, Tactician had given him the same name, symbolizing strength and resilience like steel. However, the meaning behind it had now changed. Placing his fist over his heart, Chiol swore he wouldn't stop until he reached the pinnacle of the esteemed Lee clan. He felt proud to bear the name Chiol and thanked Tactician for it. Days later, in the esteemed Lee clan's isolation ward of the judicial department, Young-ha was pacing restlessly. She grabbed the bars of her cell and shook them violently, shouting that she wanted to leave. She complained about the cramped space and lamented that she hadn't even been able to see Chiol receive his name. She screamed, demanding to know where Chiol was, leaving the guards begging for assistance. The phone in the isolation ward rang as Young-ha continued her tantrum. Moments later, while she was biting a blanket and shouting about wanting to leave, a guard opened the cell door and informed her she was free to go. Young-ha, confused, asked for clarification. The guard explained that while she would be contacted about her punishment later, she was free to leave for now. Overjoyed, Young-ha kicked the door open, prompting the guard to plead with her not to damage the cell again. As she excitedly jumped out, someone called for her to wait. Recognizing the voice, she turned around, expecting Chiol. She asked if he had truly gotten her out, and he confirmed it. Surprised, she asked how he had managed it. Chiol handed her a letter, which she opened and read. It stated that she had been appointed as an elder and would serve as the master of the 9th child, Chiol. Young-ha was stunned, but Chiol calmly told her to take good care of him and addressed her as his master. 3 years later, Chiol, now 13, put on his uniform. Gawa, tears in her eyes, asked if it was really starting today. Chiol confirmed it, and Gawa expressed disbelief that he was already old enough to begin this new chapter. Chiol reassured her he would see her soon and picked up his bag. He arrived at the school and paused at the entrance to compose himself, knowing this marked the beginning of his life as a pupil. Minutes later, all the students gathered in the field. Whispers about Chiol spread quickly, with some discussing his achievements during the steel selection ritual and naming ceremony. Others dismissed him as a lucky bastard, hating him solely for being an illegitimate child. Chiol remained silent, wondering how long the chatter would continue, as he was growing impatient. Suddenly, the students began murmuring that the 8 children of the main family were arriving. Chiol glanced to the side and saw Hwa walking across the field. The students' reactions to her were starkly different from their treatment of him, but Chiol was confused when Hwa stopped and approached him. She greeted him shyly, saying it had been a while and hoping he wasn't too bothered by what happened during the naming ceremony. Chiol, puzzled, asked what she meant. Hwa reminded him of the moment she had expressed disappointment in him, making Chiol realize she wasn't as cold-hearted as he had thought. He told her to forget about it and not to worry, which visibly relieved her. Hwa excitedly asked if he was sure, adding that she had thought he might be petty. This comment annoyed Chiol, and he asked what she meant by it. Hwa told Chiol that she had heard their aunt Kyung-ha was now his master and a member of the library. Before Chiol could respond, an instructor called for everyone's attention. The instructor announced that class assignments would begin and instructed all named pupils to gather in front while maintaining their formations. The students grew nervous, worried about being placed in the wrong class. Chiol understood their anxiety. Class allocation was crucial, as cadets trained for 3 years, and each level was divided into 5 groups. The more talented pupils were assigned to higher classes, while the less skilled were placed in lower ones. The instructor handed a paper to Hwa, congratulating her on being assigned to Class 1. Chiol had expected Hwa to be placed in the highest class, so this was no surprise. The instructor then approached Chiol, handing him his assignment card with a cold demeanor. Chiol thanked them politely, though he noticed the instructor's disappointment. He read the card and realized he had been assigned to Class 5, also known as the garbage dump, where students were expected to drop out. Chiol knew this was a setup orchestrated by the elders and Hwayeon, as class assignments for members of the main family were based on the results of the naming ceremony. While others might see this as a setback, Chiol considered it an advantage, as it meant less interference and fewer expectations. A guide approached to lead Chiol to Class 5. He agreed and followed, but he noticed Hwa glaring at him, clearly furious. Her expression seemed to ask why he was in Class 5 and why he wasn't protesting. Chiol guessed Hwa might intervene if he didn't address the situation, so he raised his hand to assure her he was fine and turned to follow the guide. As he walked, he saw other students assigned to Class 5, their faces filled with disappointment. One student noticed Chiol and expressed disbelief that a member of the esteemed Lee clan could be assigned to such a low class. Suddenly, another student approached him, asking if he was the youngest child of the main family. Chiol confirmed it. The student, Kim Han, introduced himself as the son of a small blacksmithing family that worked with the Lee clan. Han stuttered as he expressed his honor at being in the same class as Chiol, calling him the center of attention. Chiol, who didn't recall hearing Han's name in the past, asked why it was an honor. Han explained that he had always wanted to meet Chiol. Sensing Han's sincerity, Chiol sighed and asked what Han thought about his placement in Class 5. Han replied that while the instructors might have determined Chiol's current skills suited Class 5, there was no telling what the future held. Chiol was impressed by Han's determination and confidence. Smiling, he told Han that he passed, leaving Han confused. A moment later, Chiol and the others arrived at the Class 5 classroom. Choi In-ha, along with his friends, greeted the newcomers, calling them newbies. In-ha encouraged them to do their best and offered to answer any questions they might have. The instructor clapped his hands to get everyone's attention and announced that introductions were in order. Lee Jung-ho, the Class 5 instructor and a 5th rank martial artist, introduced himself. He explained that since they had new members, they would skip the lecture and start with a brief overview. Chiol noticed that Jung-ho was still full of determination and enthusiasm, recalling how, in his past life, Jung-ho had even tutored him privately when he struggled to keep up. Jung-ho instructed In-ha to take charge and teach the new students, which In-ha agreed to do. In-ha admitted he was embarrassed to say it, but he had been held back twice and was now in his second year as the class leader. He invited the newcomers to sit down, acknowledging they were likely tired from standing. In-ha also explained that they would be electing a class leader. He emphasized that while they were all cadets, they were often sent on missions, making the class leader effectively the squad captain. Aside from the instructors who provided education and training, the class leaders held full authority. One of the students asked how the class leader was chosen. In-ha explained that while he didn't know how other classes did it, Class 5 typically decided through light duels, followed by a vote. He announced they would begin the duels, clarifying that the purpose was to test each other's strength, so the use of mana was forbidden. After each duel, there would be a short break. Chiol, however, interrupted, asking if In-ha was joking. In-ha, confused, asked if Chiol was dissatisfied with something he had said. Chiol replied that he was dissatisfied with everything In-ha had said and done. He picked up a wooden sword and reminded everyone that they were in the esteemed Lee clan. He told them to get a grip, adding that if they wanted to roleplay school, they should have gone to a normal school in the safe zone instead. Chiol then walked onto the stage, ignoring In-ha's protests that he was being too radical. In-ha tried to explain that he had suggested a peaceful way to resolve the matter, but Chiol stabbed the wooden sword into the ground and declared that In-ha wouldn't understand with words. He ordered everyone to come up one by one, challenging them all to face him. A short while later, Chiol was catching his breath, exhausted but victorious. The other students lay on the ground, trembling in pain. In-ha was stunned, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. He wondered how many people Chiol had taken on single-handedly. Chiol called In-ha's name, ordering him to call up the next cadet. In-ha gulped, realizing there was only one person left, himself. Chiol placed the wooden sword on his shoulder and told In-ha to step up. In-ha hesitated, questioning why Chiol was going so far when the duel had no real reward and was merely a cadet sparring match. As the fight began, In-ha blocked Chiol's attacks but struggled to keep up. He noticed Chiol's energy was fading, but Chiol's determination remained unshaken. In-ha clenched his teeth, realizing that deep down, he understood why Chiol was pushing so hard. He too had once been as fierce and desperate to win. In-ha lunged at Chiol, attempting to slash him, but Chiol dodged. In-ha swung his sword again, but Chiol was faster, landing a decisive strike. Chiol declared himself the winner, hitting In-ha's hand and forcing him to drop the sword. In-ha fell to his knees, clutching his injured hand and screaming in pain. Chiol exhaled and ordered the other students to take In-ha to the nurse. However, he was surprised when In-ha shouted that he wasn't done yet. In-ha swung his sword with his left hand, his right hand broken, and declared the fight wasn't over. Chiol blocked the attack, noticing the determination in In-ha's eyes. He forcefully disarmed In-ha and calmly told him it was over. Then, with a swift dash, Chiol swung his sword at In-ha's stomach, causing him to cough and collapse in pain. Chiol ordered the other students to take In-ha to the nurse. He then walked to the center of the stage, addressing the class. He explained that he lived every second as if it were an hour and every hour as if it were an entire year. He warned them that life becomes easy once they start compromising, but if they don't put their lives on the line at every moment, they risk losing everything. Stabbing the sword into the ground, he shouted that he continued to fight, even as he breathed, to protect himself and everything around him. He asked if any of them had ever lived their lives that way, declaring that this was what true fighting meant. A moment later, Chiol sat on the stage catching his breath when Jung-ho approached. Jung-ho scolded him for going too far, pointing out that 4 kids had broken bones and 3 had damaged organs. Chiol stood up and responded that if they wanted to survive in the esteemed Lee clan, they needed to endure such injuries. Jung-ho countered that many of the children came from struggling homes. Chiol, however, called Jung-ho's name seriously, stopping him in his tracks. He asked Jung-ho if he really needed to explain when even the cadets understood. Jung-ho fell silent as Chiol walked past him, saying that people like Jung-ho were rare in the Lee clan because he was a good man. However, Chiol emphasized that the children were cadets of the clan, and if they strayed down the wrong path, Jung-ho needed to redirect them, even if it meant playing the villain. Chiol firmly told Jung-ho to do his job properly, leaving Jung-ho speechless and clenching his fists. The next day, Chiol entered the classroom, feeling sore and realizing he had overdone it the previous day. He noticed the students were all bandaged, some showing disdain or anger toward him, but none avoided his gaze. He felt relieved to see their determination, knowing they would be hopeless if they remained as weak as before. Some students whispered curses at him, while others praised him. Suddenly, someone greeted him from behind. Chiol turned to see Han, who apologized awkwardly for showing such a sorry side the day before. Chiol assured him it was natural to be weak, as they were still cadets. Han laughed awkwardly and asked if he could pose one question. Chiol agreed, encouraging Han to speak freely. Han asked, with determination in his voice, what he should do to become as strong as Chiol. However, he explained to Han that he wasn't yet at a level where he was good enough to teach others. Still, he praised Han for having good eyes, or rather good instincts, which confused Han. He clarified that Han had dodged his feints 3 times in a row during yesterday's duel. He advised Han to use that instinct to his advantage, adding that he seemed more like a technique-based fighter than a strength-focused one. If Han focused on perfecting what he already had, he would eventually find himself improving. Han was surprised by the advice and stuttered out a grateful thanks. Just then, someone greeted him. When he looked back, it was Inha. He noticed Inha was still quite a mess and asked if he could even train in that condition. But Inha simply asked him back whether he would have understood if he had skipped training. He guessed that he would have accused him of overreacting anyway. Inha then walked past him, saying that he wasn't there to be lectured. He smiled, realizing that Inha had changed. Jungho appeared and informed them that 4 cadets were absent due to injuries, and 5 more were missing for unknown reasons, leaving 11 present. Jungho observed that everyone looked exhausted, and the atmosphere had changed. They had been relaxed the day before, but now the tension was palpable, all because of one person. Jungho stated that the original plan was to use that day to evaluate their basic capabilities. But seeing their condition, he paused, clenched his fist firmly, then declared that they would proceed with the evaluations. A moment later, Jungho ended the tests, and the cadets collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. He explained that the class leader would be taking charge of their training from that point forward. Chiol sighed, trying to relax, thinking that 10 hours of evaluations had worn him out as well, but he knew he couldn't rest yet. He walked onto the stage as students whispered among themselves, wondering if Chiol was acting differently. They noted how many were injured from yesterday's duels and how Jungho would usually allow them to rest. He called for their attention and said he assumed he didn't need to introduce himself, but still did, officially announcing himself as their class leader. He reminded them, as Inha had likely mentioned, that the class leader held full authority unless the instructor said otherwise. He warned that his training would be harsh and that only those who were willing to keep up should follow him. He made it clear that he had no intention of forcing anyone who lacked the will to continue. This angered one of the students. Kim Bo-seong called him an arrogant bastard. In response, he calmly stabbed his sword into the stage and told them that if anyone didn't like him, they could challenge him to a duel anytime. If any of them managed to land even a single hit, he would step down as class leader. He then announced the beginning of the session and ordered everyone to spar with the person next to them. A short while later, he saw that 6 cadets had lasted until the end, while the rest had dropped out midway. He turned and walked away, telling them that was enough for today and that they were dismissed. The students grumbled, frustrated at being pushed so hard. They questioned what the point of that training even was, but Han shouted at them to stop, admitting that he was more frustrated with himself than anyone else, because even though Chiol had been exhausted, he still couldn't land a single hit on him. Some of the students approached Inha, asking what he thought of the situation. They reminded him how good they had been last year. Inha agreed, but asked if that was the reason he had failed, confusing the others. Inha stood up and said that if he didn't change now, he would end up a loser. He wanted to give everything he had, even if his arms and legs gave out. He added that they all knew exactly what Chiol was trying to do, which made everyone fall silent. He then walked away, saying that he was going to do his best, because he believed it was his last opportunity. He urged them to get it together, stop acting clueless, and quit rebelling. Later in the laboratory, Gyeongha told Chiol to begin the transformation. Connected to the device, he attempted to form an aura. However, his aura began to dissipate slowly, prompting Gyeongha to shout at him to stop. Frustrated, she exclaimed that it was another failure, and explained that the form kept breaking down whenever he tried to manifest his aura. She added that she hadn't anticipated this kind of problem after he had reached 3 stars and wished they had more records on how people in the past had used mana. Chiol then noticed a faint trace of Boundless on his finger. He wondered if, through Boundless's memories, he could access some of those ancient records. However, he hadn't yet unlocked the next set of memories. He recalled the unexpected discovery he made in the library. A presence enveloped in an ink-colored aura that even the other monsters feared. He knew that even the bravest generals of the nation had failed to defeat it. It was only when several heroes united that they managed to seal the creature in the Thousand Demons Mountain in the north. He remembered how the king had rewarded those heroes with fiefs, and how the heroes, moved by the king's generosity, forged a sword called Boundless. Learning more about Boundless was proving to be incredibly helpful. Gyeongha snapped him out of his thoughts by remarking that he was making progress all on his own, and asked him if he realized how impressive that was. She added that she was confident he would overcome this issue soon, especially since he had already nearly completed both the implication technique and the transformation technique. He thanked her and asked what it meant to attain 3 stars. She explained that it meant he could now use aura skills and enhance energy, though he still had a long way to go before mastering either. She then asked how training class had gone, commenting that he looked tired. He sighed in frustration and replied that it was just whatever. With a grin, she asked if he needed her help, confusing him. He asked how she could possibly help, but she simply laughed and told him he would see, and to just trust her. The next day in Class 5, Chiol stood at the front, remembering that uneasy feeling he had when Gyeongha told him to trust her. Jungho addressed the class and announced that they would have a special lesson on mana arts. He introduced Gyeongha as a researcher from the esteemed martial Lee clan and prompted everyone to applaud her. She laughed and said it was a bit embarrassing, then added that she didn't like dragging things out, so she would begin the lesson right away. Gyeongha began lecturing about mana, and Chiol noticed that she had improved significantly at teaching. An hour later, Gyeongha clapped her hands and announced that the boring part was over. It was time for the fun part. She explained that she would now teach them a mana enhancement method developed through research. This surprised Jungho, who asked if that wasn't outside the lesson plan. Gyeongha replied that what they had seen so far was just the beginning. She then instructed everyone to sit up straight, emphasizing that she would only demonstrate it once. Carefully, she began showing the method step by step. After the lesson, Chiol asked Gyeongha what exactly she had done. She explained that the children of the direct lineage received all kinds of support once they began classes, so she thought she'd do something similar for them. Chiol was touched by her words and thanked her. She added that theoretically the method should double his mana force and asked if that wasn't amazing. He agreed wholeheartedly. Jeongho then called for everyone's attention and announced that they would now apply the technique Gyeongha had demonstrated in a round of duels. He instructed them to choose their sparring partners. Someone approached Chiol and asked to be his partner. When he turned around, he saw that it was Inha, who warned him that he wouldn't go easy on him. Chiol replied that that was exactly what he wanted and told Inha he could start. They clashed fiercely, exchanging strikes, and Gyeongha observed that Chiol was fighting mercilessly. Yet as she watched, she couldn't help but feel as though she were seeing a reflection of herself in him. Then she overheard a student whispering nearby, saying he really didn't like Chiol. The student speculated that perhaps Chiol had been discriminated against a little. After all, he was an illegitimate child, but noted that Chiol was nothing like them. Physically, Chiol was superior, and now that his ability had awakened, he had a major head start. Another student agreed, adding that they had all worked hard as well, and questioned what Chiol could possibly understand about their struggles. Gyeongha walked toward the two students, startling them. She approached with a stern expression and seriously asked if they were talking about her disciple. The students trembled in fear at her piercing gaze and immediately bowed, apologizing and insisting they had exaggerated. But she pressed further, demanding to know what in the world they thought they understood to make such judgments about Chiol. The students only trembled more, begging for forgiveness. Boseong then stepped forward and told Gyeongha that they weren't the only ones who didn't understand. Chiol didn't either. He argued that they had all worked hard, but Chiol acted as if everything they had done amounted to nothing. Boseong asked whether it wasn't natural for them to be different, having grown up in such vastly different environments. But Gyeongha turned away from him and calmly stated that they really didn't understand. This confused Boseong. She then said perhaps it was better that way, because if they ever found out how different Chiol's life had been from theirs, they'd see their own lives as nothing more than child's play. Her words angered Boseong, and he wondered bitterly what that illegitimate child could possibly know. In frustration, he decided he would see for himself just how great Chiol really was. A short while later, Jungho announced that training was finished for the day. Boseong glanced to his side and saw Chiol wiping sweat from his brow. He thought to himself that Chiol wasn't so different after all. Chiol might claim to be different, but the only real difference was what they were born with. One of the students approached Boseong and asked if it was true that he had planned to secretly follow the illegitimate child that day, wondering aloud whether it was even allowed for cadets to freely walk around the main estate. Boseong replied that it was fine. They were cadets after all, and it wasn't like they were going anywhere dangerous. Besides, Chiol didn't even live with a legitimate family. Boseong then told his friends they couldn't let Chiol keep walking all over them. He was determined to find out how Chiol actually lived. Hours later, at Chiol's house, Boseong and his friends hid behind a wall. Boseong checked the time and realized several hours had passed since Chiol entered the research laboratory. It was already past 9 at night. His friends began complaining, saying they had training the next day, were exhausted, and didn't even know what Chiol was doing inside. Boseong accused them of giving up too easily, but they simply waved goodbye and left. Alone now, Boseong peeked toward the lab door just as Chiol emerged. He saw Chiol sigh in fatigue and muttered to himself that he had to keep going. Then Chiol walked off, and Boseong wondered if he was finally heading home, but instead, Chiol approached the training hall, a facility supposedly reserved for the main clan. Suddenly, a scream echoed from within the martial hall, shocking Boseong and the others who had stayed behind. The remaining students questioned the sounds, wondering if they were the result of intense training. Then one of them commented that maybe Chiol was truly exceptional, and perhaps they should stop following him. They admitted that Chiol's words may have been harsh, but not wrong. They suggested they should focus on training, like Inha. But Boseong objected. He insisted that he didn't skip out on training during his personal time either. In that sense, there was no difference between him and Chiol. The two students exchanged a silent look, then quietly decided to leave. As they walked off, Boseong stood there, uncertain. What is the difference between me and Chiol, he wondered. Determined to prove there was no difference, Boseong waited for Chiol to finish his training. When Chiol finally left the martial hall and walked home, Boseong quietly followed behind, watching as Chiol entered his house. Suddenly a flashlight shone on Boseong, and someone asked who he was. A guard stepped closer, saw that it was a cadet, and told Boseong that while Chiol often walked around at that hour, he hadn't known Chiol had a cadet accompanying him. That made Boseong pause. Did he say every day? Raising both hands, Boseong explained that they had something to do together this time. The guard told him that normally it would be against the rules and ordered him to return quickly. Boseong agreed, but before leaving, he peeked at Chiol's room and noticed that the lights were still on, even though it was already 2 in the morning. Turning to the guard, he said he would head back and quietly walked away. At 5 a.m. the next day, inside the exclusive training hall number 5, Boseong entered with a headache and dizziness from having returned home too late the night before. He was startled to find Chiol already there. Boseong noticed that Chiol looked exhausted and questioned whether it was truly okay for a 13-year-old to be getting only 3 to 4 hours of sleep, even if he was born with the main clan's genes and an abundance of mana. He thought about his own routine. When he went home, he rested, watched television, or played games. Though he trained frequently on his own, he still got proper sleep, rest, and entertainment. Approaching Chiol, he asked him if he wasn't tired. Chiol looked at him and replied that he guessed Boseong was one of those who had followed him the night before. Boseong admitted it and explained that because Chiol had received support from the main clan and had a head start, he'd been curious. Chiol told him that he had lived like that ever since he was young. He had gotten a bit more sleep before becoming a cadet, but now only sleeping a few hours was normal, and naturally he felt tired. Boseong then asked why he trained to that extent. Chiol stood up and quietly asked him in return, "Don't you already know the answer?" Boseong bit his lip and cursed under his breath. Meanwhile, at the patriarch's special training ground, Choi informed Tactician that the official documents regarding his request were ready. Tactician accepted the documents and reviewed them, but frowned. He said it wasn't good enough. The selected dungeons were of 7th and 8th rank, too dangerous for cadets. Tactician explained that while things like weapons and rations could be accumulated, the same didn't apply to people. They needed to create individuals capable of surviving. Choi acknowledged his words and said he would make the necessary adjustments. Choi then added that he had one more matter to report. He began detailing Chiol's recent behavior, which took Tactician by surprise. However, Tactician remarked that Chiol's eyes had always been extraordinary, ever since he was young. They were the eyes of someone who had lost things, and of someone who had lived with his head lowered to the world. But, Tactician added, transforming oneself and leading others were entirely different challenges. He informed Choi that they would be adjusting the upcoming test. Hwa was part of this batch as well, and he wanted to raise the overall standards of the cadets. Choi agreed and took the documents back for revision. Tactician then thought to himself, it was time to see whether Chiol truly had the potential to become a leader. Days later, in the Class 5 hall, Jung-ho arrived and was surprised to find his students already training early in the morning, even though it was the weekend. Hearing their determined voices and seeing their dedication, he realized he no longer needed to push them. They had taken it upon themselves. One of the students noticed Jung-ho and greeted him warmly. Jung-ho acknowledged the greeting and commented that he could see they were working hard even on the weekend. He then instructed the student to gather any cadets who were currently absent, as he had an announcement to make. The student nodded and quickly left. A few minutes later, once everyone had gathered, Jung-ho addressed the class. He told them that, although it was a bit sudden, the first evaluation had been moved forward. However, they would be granted a 1-week break in advance, which they should consider their last real rest. He advised them to make the most of it. Jung-ho was about to continue speaking, but when he saw the students smiling, he realized there was no need to remind them to at least maintain their basic training during the break. Instead, he simply told them that he trusted they would do what was necessary and praised them for their hard work so far. With that, he dismissed them, and the students responded in agreement. Chiol noted how unexpectedly the break had come and wondered if everything was all right, especially with the evaluation being pushed forward. As he stood there, he noticed his classmates weren't moving. He asked them why they weren't heading out. Han cheerfully responded that they were waiting for him, and Inha asked what his plans were for the break. Chiol looked at them and asked why they were asking him about it. After all, the break was for personal time. This confused them. He then added that they should rest when it's time to rest, and he personally had no plans for the break. His answer shocked them. The students began whispering among themselves, saying they couldn't believe Chiol was actually letting them rest. They had assumed he would organize joint training sessions and push them hard, even without a formal schedule. One of them muttered, "I didn't think we'd really get to rest." Chiol cut in, telling them that he could hear them, so they might as well say it aloud. He then asked what kind of person they thought he was. He teased them, asking if they wanted to relive their first day during the break. Everyone froze in alarm and fell silent. But then, Chiol calmly said that they should rest when it's time to rest, because rest was important too. He added that he already knew they wouldn't completely take it easy, even if he told them to, so they could each decide for themselves. Finally, he wished them a good break, and said he'd see them afterward. His classmates cheered happily, and Chiol walked away with a smile on his face. Later, in Gyeongha's research lab, Gyeongha looked up and told Chiol she had heard he was on break. She couldn't believe he had come to torment his aunt instead of taking time to rest. Frustrated, she shouted that she had a mountain of research to conduct. But Chiol casually replied that he knew she was just looking at weird stuff on her phone. Gyeongha stood up in shock, demanding to know what he meant by weird stuff. She added that Hamin had just been acknowledged by the chairman, and there was even a segment about leukemia. Chiol looked at her confused and asked what in the world she was even watching. He calmed down and asked Gyeongha seriously whether the first evaluation had been moved forward due to his father's orders. Gyeongha confirmed it, explaining that it had come through as an official directive from the main clan. Chiol immediately understood what that meant. This evaluation would be significantly more difficult than expected. He reflected on how his mana arts had hit a plateau and realized that to break through it, he needed to unlock the next set of memories stored within Boundless. The very fact that some of those memories remained sealed indicated he was still lacking something. He wondered whether a small change in himself might be enough to unlock them, but he had already tried that. It hadn't worked. Leaning back in his chair, he accidentally knocked over a stack of papers, though he didn't notice as he remained lost in thought, trying to imagine other solutions. The papers scattered across the floor, prompting Gyeongha to raise her voice in frustration, warning him to be more careful. He shot back defensively, claiming she should keep her lab tidier. As he was about to pick it up, something on the documents caught his eye. He noticed a note that stated the main difference between ancient and modern martial arts techniques lay in the intent behind them, with another line suggesting that techniques developed in ancient times were designed specifically for fighting monsters. That made him stop to think. If that were true, wouldn't the same logic apply to Split Demon? He considered how excessive the original Split Demon was. It made sense if its purpose was monster slaying. Suddenly inspired, he jumped to his feet. Gyeongha, just about to eat a cookie, looked over in confusion and asked what was going on. Chiol, energized by his revelation, announced that he had figured something out but would explain later. He rushed off toward the training hall, leaving the documents scattered and Gyeongha calling after him in irritation. Inside the training ground, Chiol restored Boundless to its original form. He knew he needed a powerful opponent to test this theory, so he closed his eyes and imagined one. Something non-human, a towering beast with massive limbs, something that couldn't be dealt with through normal techniques. He constructed a technique in his mind, one that prioritized flow, efficiency, and strength. Defense and evasion didn't matter. Flashy techniques that lacked real power were meaningless here. Positioning himself, he leapt forward with force, executing the split demon technique against the imaginary monster. When he landed, he snapped back to reality, gasping for breath. He saw Boundless emitting a dark aura. It had worked. He wondered what memory the weapon would reveal next. He found himself transported again. Looking around, he recognized the place. It was the same training hall he had seen when he first obtained Boundless, though the era was clearly different. He wondered why only the time period seemed to shift whenever he viewed these memories. Peeking inside, he saw the same figure from previous memories, training with breathtaking speed. Something caught his attention. Every time the figure switched weapons, the aura around each one changed, except for the man himself. His own aura remained stable. It wasn't that his aura was adapting to each weapon, it was Boundless that was shifting and evolving. Then another presence appeared, speaking to the man and observing that he had changed again. The man criticized the newcomer for watching his training, but the newcomer continued, asking whether the changes had begun after he acquired it, and whether he had given the evolving style a name. The man admitted that he hadn't named it, explaining that it wasn't refined enough to be called a proper technique. The newcomer laughed and casually decided to name it himself. He called it 1,000 Forms. The man accepted the name without complaint, saying it wasn't bad. Chiol edged closer to observe more, but made a sound that gave him away. The man turned sharply and questioned whether the other had brought someone with him. The newcomer quickly denied it, claiming he only came for a fair fight and wouldn't bring outsiders. Chiol froze in place, overwhelmed by the exchange. When he caught a glimpse of the newcomer's face, his breath caught. The man's hair and eye color unmistakably bore the traits of the Marshall Lee clan's main bloodline. A week later, on a forest road, Chiol and his fellow cadets traveled by bus. As he looked out the window, he observed the scenery, unchanged from both the past and the future. Beyond the horizon stood the massive wall separating the safe zones from the danger zones. Long ago, a colossal rift had appeared near the Pacific Ocean. Officially, it was deemed an unexplored space, completely inaccessible. From that blue hole, unknown monsters began to emerge. Humanity fought back against the invaders, attempting to reclaim their lost territories. Despite decades of resistance, vast regions remained unmapped and perilous. People began referring to those regions as unexplored or danger zones. Han leaned toward Chiol and asked whether the separation between the safe and danger zones was still maintained by the wall, commenting on how the landscape grew more desolate as they approached. Chiol confirmed this, noting that the scenery wasn't too bad from behind the wall. In contrast, the unexplored villages deep within the danger zones were far removed from anything resembling civilization. He recalled having lived in one such village during the war, hiding from enemies. He quietly advised Han to stay alert. The place they were headed to was a dungeon located in an unknown zone, one that remained completely unexplored. Moments later, the bus arrived at their destination. The cadets stepped out, taking in the surroundings. Jung-ho called them together and explained that they would first set up a base at that location. The test would begin once the necessary supplies were secured. He informed them that the bodyguards would remain stationed at the base, so once outside, the cadets would be on their own. However, he assured them that he would provide the best support possible from within the camp. Jung-ho encouraged them to give it their all and display everything they had prepared for this moment. The cadets responded with confidence and enthusiasm. Chiol turned to face the group and stated that he would take command from that point forward. He warned them that the evaluation would be considerably harder because of his presence. Before beginning, he offered them one last opportunity to back out, fully aware that the trial ahead was not designed for cadets. Their destination was the forest of the human-faced spiders, a dungeon notorious for being covered in dense webs that constantly revealed the location of intruders to the monsters within. He recalled that the mission objective was to capture an adult human-faced spider on video, a test that was clearly orchestrated by his father. Just as he finished speaking, In-ha stepped forward and declared that there was no use trying to scare them anymore. No one in Class 5 would run away. Han agreed with confidence, and even Bo-seong added that they trusted Chiol. Their words surprised him. He sighed, smiling faintly, and commented on how casually they were saying such cringeworthy things. Bo-seong shyly replied that Chiol was the one who had created that atmosphere in the first place. Chiol accepted their determination and announced that he would assume that no one planned to give up. He instructed them to check their communication devices and supplies before departure. Once everything was confirmed, they would begin their entry into the forest. The cadets cheered in agreement, ready for what lay ahead. A moment later, Chiol stepped out of the base, fully aware that the forest ahead was home to colonies of human-faced spiders, creatures with human-like heads that exhibited social behavior similar to ants and bees, making them extremely difficult to handle. He turned to the group and reminded them that their mission was to record the behavior of human-faced spiders that were at least 10 years old using their filming equipment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he announced that from that point onward, he wanted In-ha to take command. In-ha was caught off guard and asked what Chiol meant by that. Chiol explained that he would be moving alone from here and declared that he would become bait for the human-faced spiders. The rest of the group stood in confusion, processing his words, until they suddenly shouted in protest, demanding to know what he meant by that. Deeper within the forest, spiders crawled across the ground and trees when Chiol suddenly drove his weapon into one of them, killing it instantly. Breathing heavily, he looked up and noted that they had all begun to gather, just as he had hoped. To him, it was worth killing one to trigger the release of its danger-signaling pheromones. He recalled that human-faced spiders took only highly nutritious prey back to their den to feed their larvae. The way they assessed nutrition was straightforward. Strength. The stronger the prey, the more valuable it was to them. As the spiders rushed toward him, Chiol shifted Boundless into the form of a spear, knowing that their instinct required prey to demonstrate its power. He struck swiftly, cleaving another spider in half using the split demon technique. When he looked up again, a swarm of spiders had gathered, their many eyes glaring at him. As they lunged, he remained calm. A small smile formed on his lips as he dropped his weapon and allowed the spiders to capture him. Sometime later, Chiol regained consciousness. He realized he was wrapped tightly in webbing and wondered if he was inside one of the spider's cocoons. For now, things were going according to plan. Though he felt slightly bloated from the venom, his physical condition was still manageable. He activated his stealth arts to erase his presence and returned Boundless to its original form. Carefully, he sliced through the strands holding him and considered that if this was indeed their den, then the spider larvae must be nearby. He pierced the cocoon with Boundless and cut a small opening to peek outside. What he saw next confused him. There were far too many feeding cocoons, an unusual number for just a day's hunt. Many should have been consumed by now, yet they remained untouched. Then he noticed a massive cocoon in the center of the den. Several spiders stood guard around it with unusual caution. It moved. Chiol froze. A strange sensation ran through him. His dark energy resonated with whatever was inside. The large cocoon cracked open and spider legs began to emerge, followed by a human-like hand. From within appeared the human-faced Spider Queen, a rank 5 monster. She referred to the surrounding spiders as her children and asked if they were hungry. Chiol noted that although she spoke in human language, her mouth never moved. He began to wonder if the dark energy inside him was allowing him to hear her thoughts directly. Suddenly, the queen swung one of her sharp legs and stabbed the cocoon where he had been kept. Fortunately, Chiol leapt out just in time, but the effort disrupted his stealth technique and exposed his position. The Spider Queen glared at him and demanded to know what he was, accusing him of holding the power that had awakened her. She demanded to know why a human possessed it and shouted for him to hand it over. As she spoke, she released an aura of fear, an oppressive pressure only high-ranking predators could emit. But Chiol remained unaffected. Fear had no hold on him. The queen, visibly stunned, questioned how he had deflected her mana. Her expression turned furious as she called him an impudent human. But then, she caught the scent of smoke. Her gaze shifted sharply to the side. An explosion erupted in the distance, flames rising high in the center of the forest. The Spider Queen panicked as she saw her forest engulfed in flames. Furious, she demanded to know what Chiol had done, but he simply smirked and explained that it was a weapon known as a mana explosive shell. He remarked that the forest was filled with plenty of material to burn, and it had erupted magnificently the moment he gave the signal. Through his earpiece, Han reported that they were departing and estimated that it would take no more than 30 minutes to reach the den. Soon after, Jung-ho contacted Chiol from the base camp to inform him that a 5th-rank entity had been detected in the den and was about to suggest that Chiol return. However, Chiol calmly told Jung-ho not to worry about him, and instead to focus on supporting the other cadets. The Spider Queen, enraged, ordered her children to leave the den and defend the forest. Turning her attention back to Chiol, she vowed to tear him apart and consume him herself. She insulted him as an impudent human child, questioning whether he believed he could defeat her alone, or if he was placing his faith in his teammates who were currently racing toward the den. She warned him not to be so certain that they would reach him, declaring that he would soon realize he was powerless against her. But Chiol remained composed and told her she was the one underestimating him. This caught her off guard. He closed his eyes, focused, and then opened them, his eyes glowing with power as he looked at the Spider Queen. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the forest, Inha issued commands to continue detonating the mana explosive shells in order to draw more of the human-faced spiders away. He instructed Group 1 to head to the den and secure Chiol's retreat route, which they immediately followed. Boseong approached and asked whether a change had been detected from the den and if it was truly safe to proceed. Inha replied that they would move forward as planned, as it was Chiol's direct order, and all they could do now was hope Chiol could hold on a little longer. As the cadets set fire to the forest, destroying it section by section, the Spider Queen launched relentless attacks. With each strike, she shouted in disbelief, questioning why Chiol was still alive and how he continued to stand. Though Chiol successfully dodged her strikes, he remained quiet and focused. She looked into his eyes, now burning with energy, and questioned what he was seeing with them. Chiol recognized the ability. Eyes that could perceive everything hidden, the countless currents of power. They were magic eyes, capable of reading the flow of mana. But he suddenly coughed up blood, realizing that although the magic eyes had allowed him to avoid a fatal strike, the difference in power between them was too great. He had only narrowly escaped death. Applying healing potion to his wounds, he noted with relief that the Spider Queen had only recently hatched and couldn't control her body perfectly. Pouring dark energy into Boundless, he prepared for a decisive move, knowing he had just one chance. He assumed the basic stance of 1,000 forms, enhanced his energy with lightning, and delivered a powerful slash toward the Spider Queen. The strike detonated within the den, unleashing a violent burst of energy. Blood sprayed from the Spider Queen's wound as Chiol stood, breathing heavily. He observed the queen writhing and screaming in pain, but quickly realized that his attack had been too shallow. Her thick carapace had not been fully breached. The Spider Queen rose again, swearing she would make him her servant. She vowed to tear everything from within him and use it to regenerate her body. Then, with fury, she hurled a sharp web in his direction, declaring she would make him suffer for eternity. Chiol attempted to dodge, but he was too slow. One strand of the web struck him in the head and burrowed into his brain. Suddenly, he heard her voice, urging him to submit. Pain radiated from his head, spreading through his entire body. The queen's voice echoed repeatedly in his mind, commanding his submission. He screamed in agony. The Spider Queen laughed at his suffering, mocking him and questioning where his arrogance had gone. But then, unexpectedly, the queen began coughing blood. Alarmed, she shouted in panic, demanding to know what was happening. Her body erupted in fresh wounds as she stumbled toward Chiol, trying to strike him down with her claw. Chiol, still standing firm, told her that she should have been more careful. A burst of flame ignited beside the Spider Queen, setting her ablaze. Chiol, watching calmly, explained that insects, particularly spiders, were naturally vulnerable to fire. As the flames spread, he turned to his cadets and remarked that they were late. Han, catching his breath, apologized and explained that they had to fight through monsters on the way, which delayed their arrival. Supporting Chiol by the arm, Han helped him walk. Chiol casually commented that it seemed special training would be necessary once they returned, which made Han wince and express disbelief that Chiol could say something like that even in his condition. Chiol then instructed the group to leave the den immediately. The cadets agreed and quickly made their way outside. Meanwhile, in the evaluation conference hall, instructors murmured among themselves. They noted that Class 5 from the first years was late, despite a report stating they had returned 30 minutes prior. Some speculated that they might have failed the mission like Class 4. Others remarked that it wouldn't be surprising considering the dungeon in question was a special 6th rank dungeon, meaning an anomalous phenomenon had occurred within. Just then, Jung-ho entered and apologized for the delay. He explained that they had numerous injuries and had prioritized getting the cadets to the clinic. Rushing to the stage, he picked up the remote and announced that he would begin the report immediately. He explained that Class 5's mission had been to capture footage of adult human-faced spiders and their natural behavior. However, due to the unexpected anomaly, the team also began collecting additional information. Jung-ho reported that Class 5 had divided into 4 groups before entering the dungeon and had deployed 132 mana explosive shells. One of the instructors interrupted, asking for clarification on the use of weapons. Jung-ho confirmed that they had indeed used weapons, stating that an additional 52 explosive shells had been deployed after encountering further monsters, bringing the total to 184. The instructor became visibly angry, accusing Class 5 of attempting to destroy the entire dungeon. The instructor shouted at Jung-ho, reminding him that the mission was to document the anomalous phenomenon, not to demolish the site. He questioned how the mission could be considered a success under such circumstances. Jung-ho responded calmly, affirming that the mission had been successfully completed. Demanding evidence, the instructor ordered Jung-ho to show the video. At that moment, the conference room doors opened and Chiol entered. He apologized for being late and explained that time had been needed to restore the damaged recording equipment. He then handed the repaired footage to Jung-ho. Hua, standing nearby, muttered that Chiol was insane, questioning how he could justify using explosive devices in a dungeon. She also noted that there was no need for him to be captured alive. Chiol simply replied that it had been the most reliable method to ensure the entire process was recorded accurately. A short while later, the video played. The room fell silent. The previously critical instructor, now stunned, acknowledged that the report had been entirely accurate. He remarked that the use of explosives had been as dangerous as pouring oil onto a fire, but he could now see that everything had been executed according to plan. He questioned whether anyone could consider such a strategy normal. Chiol responded that his only objective had been to formulate the plan with the highest chance of success. He then asked whether cadets could truly have completed that mission with a conventional approach. The question rendered the instructor speechless. Chiol continued, stating that he had chosen to do whatever was necessary to avoid failure or abandonment of the mission. He reminded the panel that the esteemed Marshall Lee clan was a place where results spoke louder than anything else. The previously critical instructor thinks what had seemed like chaos was now revealed to be deliberate and calculated. Even the unpredictable elements had been factored in, making it clear that Chiol, despite his status as an illegitimate child, had approached the mission with complete certainty in his plan. The chief evaluator addressed Jung-ho, stating that while Chiol's approach was far too unconventional to be used as a reference example for future evaluations, the success of the mission, achieved without a single casualty, could not be ignored. On that basis, the decision was made. For the first evaluation test, Class 5 was the only first-year group to receive full marks.